The Rockstar Wants a Wife. Book 5 in the Romance Island Resort series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Chris from Google. 34. Marama landed on a sand cay, still covered in a thin layer of water that reflected the sky better than the mirrors back at Camp Romance. The sun was starting to sink now, and the date was supposed to include a romantic sunset dinner. With water everywhere, it didn't look like a picnic would be particularly practical. Marama was prepared though. Out of the hovercraft, she produced a folding table and chairs, then proceeded to set it for two. Food, wine, the works, there was enough for all four of them, Jason thought, and he said as much. Marama just laughed, telling him that there was another basket inside for her and the TV crew. The cameraman perked up at this. The sun's not low enough anyway. I'll break for dinner and we can go back to filming after. Melissa kept her eyes on the cameraman until he disappeared into the hovercraft, when she slumped against the back of her chair. Finally. What do you say we get to know each other a bit while he's gone? Say all the things we don't want the world to know, so we're left with nothing else to talk about but the weather while we're watching the sunset in front of our audience. She smiled. Shall I ask the first question? Sure. Why did you agree to this reality TV thing? I can't imagine someone like you wanting a wife. Melissa crunched into her dinner. Jason hesitated, but he knew he needed a ready rockstar reply. Paige and I go way back. I owed her a favor. She called it in. Melissa nodded. Figures. Now your turn. What do you want to ask me? Jason leaned forward. You said you're a geologist. What's it like? Do you enjoy the work? I mean, it's not all billion-year-old rocks and fossils, is it? Melissa sipped her champagne, then set down her glass. Yeah, I liked it. Right up until the bottom fell out of the iron ore market and the mining companies declared me as redundant as the nipples on Lorelei's silicon breasts. She met his stare. What? Didn't you know they were fake? It's all in the bounce. Real ones do and fake ones don't. Find an excuse for her to jump up and down or run along the beach. Then you'll see it. Jason made a mental note to do just that. In the interests of science, of course. A rock star might need to know how to spot plastic surgery one day. So is that why you decided to join the show? Jason asked, trying to keep his thoughts on Melissa's face and not Lorelei's boobs. Melissa laughed. Sort of. I mean, 6 months ago I had a great job, even if it was a bit of a boys' club at work, but I at least felt like one of the guys, you know? Then we all got laid off, and the other guys were finding new jobs, going back to university to get their teaching diplomas and all sorts of things. The night I came home unemployed, my boyfriend, I was living with him at the time, told me not to worry. He'd keep me until I found a new job, he said. I could stay home and take over from the cleaner. He wouldn't even charge me rent if I did a good job. She drained her wine glass, then poured another, slamming the bottle down into the ice bucket. From Melissa's simmering fury, Jason didn't figure her for the housewifely type. So I take it you're definitely single now? Fuck yes. I wasn't putting up with that uppity petroleum engineer a minute longer, lording it over me like it was my poor decisions that crashed the iron ore prices while oil and gas were still going strong. Though it looks like oil prices have dropped now too. I moved back in with my family and this seemed like, I don't know, an opportunity. For something new. Maybe even someone new. She raised her glass to him, then drank. Jason reached for his beer. Yeah. Maybe. Melissa set her cutlery on her plate and dabbed her lips with her napkin. My turn. What's the worst part of the show for you so far? You mean aside from the eliminations? Melissa's smile died. Yeah, that. You looked as shocked as the rest of us. I guess you aren't used to women trying to kill you. Jason laughed. No, I'm used to them wanting to do other things to me. Melissa lowered her voice. You know, you're not what I thought you'd be, with your reputation and all. I expected you to be an arrogant asshole who'd make my ex look like a saint. Instead, you're kind of nice. I might even buy your next album instead of torrenting it next time." Jason suppressed a groan. She was one of those people who thought her work should be paid but all art should be free, with no thought for the hard-working artists who deserve to make a living from their labors too. Next thing she'd tell him she downloaded pirated books for her e-reader, when those took even longer to produce than one of his albums. Months' worth of work, not just weeks. There was no sound except the waves in the distance as they dug into their dessert. The hovercraft creaked as the cameraman emerged. "That sunset looks about perfect. You two ready for more filming?" Saved by the bloke, Jason thought with considerable relief. "Sure. It looks real romantic." 35. The camp was pitch dark by the time Jason and Melissa returned. The fire had burned down to embers, and it looked like all the other girls had gone to bed. "You know the one thing I miss, living out here?" Melissa whispered. "Hot showers, a phone, internet access, and having a fridge?" Jason suggested, wondering which one she'd pick. She told plenty of stories about her geology field work on the trip back, so he knew she was no stranger to camping. "It's having decent lights at night." She pointed at the dim solar lights lining the track, providing just enough illumination so that you could see where to walk, but not enough to see the tents only a few meters away. "I have one e-reader with a light, but the battery's gone flat and I have nowhere to charge it, so I'm stuck with the one that doesn't have a backlight, but it's as bad as a paperback. No light and I can't read a thing." She nudged him. "What about you?" "Well, I don't miss the lights," Jason admitted. "Probably because I have reading lights in my cabin. They're solar lights like the rest of the ones here, but these are little concentrated ones clipped to the bedheads. Definitely enough light to read by." "So what do you miss?" she persisted. "I wish I'd brought my guitar, to be honest," he said. "I don't play much. Not in months. But lying there, listening to the waves, watching the moonlight on the water, for the first time in ages, I felt like playing something. And not just playing. Creating something new. It'll probably be terrible. I'd call it Ode to Camp Romance and maybe sell it to the studio to use in the credits for the show." Melissa laughed softly. "Given how big the rest of your band's songs have been, I doubt it'd be bad. You'd probably have a new #1 hit on the charts within the week." Nah. Jason didn't feel like talking about the band, or why his songs would never hit the charts the way Angel's had. He was supposed to be winning himself a wife to take to Angel's wedding, not writing silly songs. "You know what? If you want to read, I'll still be up for a bit. Probably reading too. You can come use the light in my cabin for a bit if you want." Melissa stopped. "If that's rockstar for come over to my place for sex, you're barking up the wrong tree, pal. We had one date." Jason shrugged. "Rockstars don't need to use euphemisms. A dick's a dick, sex is sex, and a reading light is a fucking light to read your book by. You want it, the offer's there. You don't, your call." He shuffled into his cabin, leaving Melissa standing in the sand outside. Shaking his head, he stripped down to his shorts and slid into bed. Not sure what to make of Melissa, he reached under his bed for the books he'd borrowed from the resort library. The top one was a recent release, but it was already tattered from being passed around the female staff. Some sort of adventure romance about a plane crash. As long as it beat the billionaire romances he didn't want to touch anymore, it would satisfy him. Jason flipped open the book to the first page. He hadn't even reached the first sex scene when someone knocked tentatively on his door. He said. The door swung open. "Is your offer still open?" Melissa whispered. She changed into a pair of pajamas and the strong smell of mint made Jason think she'd probably brushed her teeth too. "I'm using this light, but there's another one on that bed." Jason pointed. Yes, single beds on opposite sides of the room. She could make of that whatever she wanted. "There's linen in that locker if you need it." He went back to his book. Jason heard her messing around in the locker, clicking on the light and finally settling on the slightly squeaky mattress springs, but he didn't so much as glance up. That was the whole point of reading. You got lost in your own little world, and the real world could go get fucked. Speaking of fucked. The mattress squeaked as Melissa shifted from lying on her belly to curled on her side, facing the wall. Her knuckles whitened as her fingers tightened around her e-reader. A really scary bit, Jason decided. Melissa bit her lip. The penny dropped. "You're reading a sex scene, aren't you?" he blurted out. Melissa turned red. "And what if I am?" she challenged. "Is it a good one?" Jason persisted. "Maybe." He gave in. "Can I read it?" Melissa clutched her e-reader to her chest. "I don't think so. I'm reading it right now." A really hot sex scene then, and a good one. Jason couldn't resist. "I could read it aloud if you like. Kind of like sharing, only better. I used to do voiceovers for radio ads before the band made it big. I can do deep and sexy, the way a book's supposed to be read." Melissa eyed him. "A rock star reading romance?" Jason slid his own romance novel under his pillow. "I'll give it a go. If I suck at it, you can always tell me to stop." She considered for a long moment, then extended her e-reader across the divide between the two beds. "The scene starts from that page." Jason skimmed the first few lines. Foreplay. Not his usual way of starting a seduction, but if that's what floated her boat. He took a deep breath and began to read. 36. "Oh my God, Jay, stop!" a feminine voice squealed as Penny left the bathroom. The voice only grew louder as Penny approached Jay's cabin. "Please?" "I can't breathe," from muffled words Penny couldn't discern. "So hard." Jay said something too low for Penny to hear. "But that bit with the tongue. I seriously thought I'd explode." "Oh my God." Melissa's words disappeared in a squeal. "Let the best bonker win," Penny fumed, stomping back to her tent. Jay really was sleeping his way through the contestants. He hadn't even asked her on a date yet, let alone invited her to have sex. Did that mean he didn't want her? Penny's heart froze at the sound of a delighted giggle from his cabin. The world just wasn't fair. 37. "Please? I can't breathe from laughing so hard." Melissa gasped. Jason dropped his voice lower, drawing out each word as he read the paragraph again, trying in vain to imagine the scene the author had described. He was an expert with his tongue, as hundreds of girls had told him, but even he didn't think that was physically possible. He bit his tongue before mentioning that to Melissa though. She really seemed to like the book. "I'm going to sleep," he told her. "You can stay there as long as you like. Reading, sleeping, whatever. I don't mind. Not like I need the other bed." With the practiced ease of a man who could sleep anywhere, Jason drifted off into dreamland. When day dawned, he found Melissa fast asleep in the other bed, with her e-reader pillowed on her chest. Jason grabbed some clothes as quietly as he could, and headed for the shower without waking her. 38. Penny whisked the pancake batter within an inch of its life, or she would have if it had had one, as she watched Jay emerge from his cabin and stumble to the bathroom. A few moments later, Melissa slipped out too, looking like she'd just woken up. Had she and Jay been at it all night? Penny dug her nails into the whisk handle. At least they'd kept it quiet for most of the time. He'd stopped making her squeal after Penny's bathroom break, or maybe Penny had just slept through it. Thank God for small mercies, whichever it was. There was nothing worse than listening to someone else have sex with the man you wanted and couldn't have. Wait, what? Penny almost dropped the whisk but caught it in time. She didn't want Jay. She wanted the world to see her cooking. She should get back to it, Penny told herself. The pancakes wouldn't make themselves. Penny busied herself, firing up the barbecue and finding a bowl for the syrup, so it could warm on a corner of the grill while she cooked pancakes for everyone. She knew it wasn't her job. The camp managers Beck and Lazy Luke were supposed to cook, but she was calmer in the kitchen. She didn't want to kill everyone, and the need to rip out some bitch's hair or claw her eyes out lessened a little at least. She could forget about everyone else when she was thinking about food. The grill was hot enough now. Time to concentrate on turning the thick mixture into perfect, fluffy circles. Penny poured a single pancake just to test the temperature, peering at it as she flipped it, to make sure she had the timing right for the rest, then slid it onto a plate when she was done. She spooned out a dozen evenly spaced circles on the hot plate, watching with satisfaction at how well she'd measured out the mix. They'd stack perfectly on a plate, ready to be drizzled with syrup. Not maple syrup like she wanted, but golden syrup would do. If only they had fresh blueberries. That smells incredible. Like cake. Penny turned and found herself face to face with Jay. He wore nothing but a pair of shorts, his perfectly muscled chest and abs on display for all to stare at. Or just her right now, seeing as they were alone on the veranda. Pancakes, she corrected. And it's probably just the syrup you can smell. She waved at the bowl. I haven't had pancakes in months. This is the last place I expected to get some. I am officially in love. Penny found herself enfolded in his arms, pressed against that hard body in a hug as hot as it was unexpected. She stared up at him, letting out a gasp as her body melted like butter at his touch. Unable to say anything, unable to even think, she did what her body was screaming at her to do. Penny kissed him. Jay's hand moved to the back of her head, his tongue tickling hers as he took the lead in this dance. She couldn't suppress a moan as her lips molded to his, her tongue tingling as it explored his mouth. She wanted to wrap her legs around his waist and beg him to take her on the table, then and there, wreathed in the scent of vanilla and eggs and sweet, sweet syrup. Well, good morning, Paige said. Penny peeled her hand off Jay's bottom, wondering if his searingly hot kiss had actually caramelized her lips. They felt burned, like he hadn't stopped kissing her at all, instead of stepping away to greet Paige and the ever-present camera crew, who looked like they'd caught the whole thing on film. Penny ducked her head, trying to hide her red cheeks, as she dealt feverishly with the pancakes before they burned. She didn't want Jay. She needed him. Every perfect inch of him, from top to toe, and every bit in between. Her mouth parched at the thought. You took your time, Jay said to Paige. I want to get the next elimination over and done with. This morning, if we can. Penny's spatula slipped, sending a pancake tumbling to the deck. Elimination? Was that why Jay had kissed her? Was he saying goodbye? Sure, he was in love with someone else. Lorelai. Or Maya. Or Melissa. The sluts who'd already opened their legs for him, while Paige had interrupted Penny before she could have Jay. Was that her game? Was Paige setting Penny up to be the bitch because the real bitches were Jay's favorites, so she had to make them look good? Did Jay know? Maybe that's why he intended to send Penny home. He was too kind to let her be Paige's bitch for the rest of the show, so he was helping her escape. So much for cooking on national television. Paige would hide all the good stuff and only show the bad, as she tried to make the whole country hate her. Penny blinked back tears, forcing herself to focus on spooning out the next batch of pancakes. The perfect circles wavered in her vision. This whole mess had been a horrible mistake. 39. Jason munched his way through a stack of sublime pancakes while the girls took turns in the bathrooms. They wanted to look good for the lineup. For the first time, he wondered if they did it for him or for the cameras. Were they trying to catch the eye of some talent scout who saw them on their screen, or did they honestly think a perfectly lipsticked pout beneath mascara-slicked lashes would change his mind about sending them home? He shook his head. They evidently had never paid attention to the girls in the band. Both Angel and Joe had worn enough stage makeup to blend in at a Kiss concert. Anonymity after the concerts had been easy for them, just wash the muck off and walk out, without a single fan identifying them. These girls wanted to be noticed. But could they handle the sort of media attention he dealt with every day? All right, he didn't now, but if he ever made a comeback tour, the reporters would be back with a vengeance. He already had Paige's answer, no. No girl could cope, standing beside Jay Felix in the limelight. She'd be buried in a storm of hate. Now, Melissa might be able to handle it. She'd probably give as good as she got. He figured Lorelai might manage too, but in a completely different way. Lorelai would smile for the cameras, bat her eyelashes, and completely ignore anything they had to say that wasn't a compliment. She couldn't really be that shallow, no one could, but if the media bought it. Then there was Calais and Maya and Penelope. Capable women that he really liked. But Penelope's face mirrored her feelings. She couldn't hide anything from the press. Maya had her son to protect, but it was only a matter of time before the media found out about him, and then the speculation would start. If you listened to the media for long enough, you'd believe that half the fatherless bastards in Australia were the fruit of his loins, and a truckload in America too. Never mind that he'd never failed to return a negative fatherhood test for every baby. And Calais, who had clammed up so much he'd barely managed to get more than 10 words out of her since she'd arrived at the camp. Jason shook his head. He didn't have to worry about the media today though. The show wouldn't screen on TV for weeks yet, so there wouldn't be any media waiting at the airport for the girl he sent home today. He scanned today's lineup. Penelope's face showed outright panic. Calais was intent on her shoes as usual. Lorelai and Melissa both wore confident smiles, and Maya just looked resigned. Time to put them out of their misery. Jason marched up the veranda steps, babbling for the benefit of the camera about how hard it was to choose one girl out of all his favorites. He hoped Paige chose to cut that bit when it came to editing. When he reached the girls, he halted a couple meters away so he could see all of their faces. He didn't need to, he knew exactly whose eyes he needed to meet. "Maya, it's time to go home," he said softly. Her breath hissed out in an obvious sigh of relief. Jason took heart. He'd made the right decision. "I know you're needed at home more than you need to be here. I've had an awesome time with you, especially on our date in town the other night, but I can't be selfish. Life isn't all popcorn and pearl meat. There's the odd Friday the 13th tucked in among all the perfect days." Maya smiled. She understood the oblique reference to her son, even if no one else did. She strode forward and so did the security guards, but Jason signaled for them to stay back. Maya wasn't going to kill him, he was sure of it. He was right too. She flung her arms around his neck and kissed his cheek, murmuring "thank you," before she trotted off to her tent to collect her things. "I'll want to do some individual interviews with the girls," Paige said briskly. "Jay, you stay beside the car with Wes. Wes, you make sure you get some good footage of him and Maya saying goodbye and her driving off. Right, I'll have Melissa up first and Penelope next. We'll set up on that rock beside the beach so there's a nice backdrop. Cole, you come with me." Callie rushed past Jason as if she was busting to use the bathroom, but Jason was surprised to see tears streaming from her reddened eyes. What had he done to make her cry? Jay hesitated for just long enough for Paige to disappear from view, before he made up his mind. It was time to get to know the enigmatic Calais. He wanted to see her smile like she had in their speed dating interview. 40. Feeling like the world's most inept stalker, Jason followed the girl across the sand dunes, slipping and sliding so many times that he lost his thongs twice before she finally came to a halt at the top of a rust-colored dune that was higher than the rest. From this vantage point, you could see clear out to sea and even the western edge of the Buccaneer archipelago. Not quite as far as Romance Island, but Jason didn't need to see his island to know where it lay. Oblivious to the view, Calais sank to her knees and wept. Jason was lost. He had no experience with this sort of heartbreak. Oh, unless you counted Angel in the early days after her abduction. But offering her comfort back then would earn you a knife in the ghoulies just as surely as saying you'd seen her cry. So he said what any sane bloke would in the situation, "What did I do to upset you?" Calais sniffled and peered up at him. "Nothing," she said finally. Jason squatted on the sand beside her. "So what didn't I do that you think I should have?" A tiny laugh erupted from Calais. "I don't know." Jason was all out of inspiration, but he didn't want to leave her here either. So he sat there in silence, hoping she'd break it. After maybe 10 minutes of staring out over the ocean, Kylie said, "It's nothing you did or didn't do. It's this whole situation. I hate being in a harem. At your beck and call, waiting through the boredom until you make your selection of just one of us for a day or a night, then you bring us back here to await your pleasure, whenever that might be." Jason tried to wrap his head around her words. A harem? I don't think of any of you like that. Isn't a harem just for sex and babies, where everyone wears those sexy see-through pants? And there's eunuchs? He covered his jewels at the thought. There's Luke, the camp manager. He might be a eunuch, Kylie offered. Jason shook his head. Nope. He did Daphne in the kitchen on the first night. No, she exclaimed. Oh yes. I saw them. I got out of the kitchen real quick before they saw me. Kylie tapped her chin. So that's why you sent her home. Did Maya sleep with him too? I don't know. I don't think so. Jason closed his mouth before he betrayed Maya's secrets. Just not my type, I guess. And her son needed her. Kylie eyed him. So it's not just a publicity stunt. Are you really looking for a wife? Maybe, he hedged. What about you? She sighed. No, I'm not looking for a wife. I didn't even enter. Not really. My brother submitted for me when I wasn't going to. I think he was trying to help, but today just made it worse, not better. And that wasn't cryptic at all. So let me get this straight. You were in some woman's harem before, but your brother pulled you out so that you could learn to like men instead. But I remind you of everything you hate about men, or the unfairness that gay marriage isn't legal in Australia yet? Kylie laughed properly then. No, I like guys, or I did. Someone very close to me was in a restrictive relationship, where her partner kept her isolated, just like we are here, until she pretty much depended on him for everything. And when he didn't love her anymore, she died. Suicide. Kylie pressed her lips together, shaking her head firmly. So I don't like harems. And I think I realized that today, when we were all lining up and everyone looked to you for your favor. I wanted to scream that it was wrong and we should all go home. But you didn't. Kylie shuddered. And turned it into a horror scene like when Daphne left? No thanks. I'm not a raving lunatic. So I held together as long as I could, before coming up here to be alone. Jason nodded. He took that as his cue to head back to camp. He needed to talk to Paige. 41. But what about your next date? Paige hissed. You have to pick one of them and… I'm going home to the resort, Jason said. When I come back out here, we'll see. He climbed into the jet boat, nodded to Baz, and ignored Paige as they set off across King Sound. Jason barely noticed the changing tides as the boat skirted around the whirlpools at the entrance to the sound, and then they were around the point, skimming between the islands of the archipelago. He needed to think. He needed to talk to someone. A woman, preferably, who didn't have a stake in all this craziness. His first thought was his sister Jo. She'd be honest, and she wouldn't hold back either. The moment he walked into his villa, he headed straight for the phone. Jo made it halfway through her greeting before Jason asked, "Are reality TV shows degrading?" Jo didn't hesitate. God, yes. Degrading to the people in them, and more degrading still to the idiots who watch them. I stopped watching TV almost entirely because of them. It's not reality. It's a warped, distorted view, manipulated by the TV producers and the people that agree to the whole farce. Including the dating shows? Jo made a noise of disgust deep in her throat. Those are even worse. You mean like the rural romance one the resort's hosting? I know it's good for the resort because Zahn gets to show the place off, but I don't know how anyone can sign up for one of those. They'd have to be desperate for love if they think they can find it in a matter of days with a bunch of complete strangers. Not to mention, it's not one stranger at a time. It's all the girls competing for desperate and dateless's attention while he seduces all of them. I bet if the show didn't have a PG rating, there'd be mass orgies going on behind the scenes. There probably are, but just not on the bits they show on TV. She sure did know a lot about them. Thanks, Joe. He walked over to the cradle to put the phone back. Wait, why are you asking? Are you thinking about— No, Jason. Don't. Just don't. If you— Jason set the phone firmly on the charger, ending the call before he had to lie to Joe. She hadn't answered his question though. Not really. She'd been so against all such shows that he couldn't bring himself to ask her. Sighing, Jason strode out to the jetty. He thought better walking the boards than he did cooped up inside. Something about the sea air or something. Not that it smelled any different to the air at Camp Romance. Just being alone, maybe. I thought I saw you come in. Or not. Had enough of your harem already? Again with that word. Jason stared at Zahn. Are harems degrading to women? Zahn snorted. God hell yes. They're the ultimate expression of male power. Keeping a bunch of women locked away from the world, existing solely for your pleasure? It's barbaric. So I'm a barbarian now? He tested. Only if you've turned them all into sex slaves. Zahn blinked. You haven't, have you? Woven some sort of rockstar spell over them, the way you have all the other girls I've seen you with, so they'll agree to share you? Not that I know of. Jason broke into a smile. You seriously think I'd be capable of that? Zahn's expression grew unusually blank. Well, look at the evidence. Fung, Flavia, Gaia, and all the girls who came before. I guess the only question would be, why haven't you done something like this earlier if that's what you wanted? Jason shook his head slowly. I never wanted a harem. Not before and not out of the show. I only wanted one woman, and now. One of the girls today said she felt like a harem girl. That they all were. If she's right, it's wrong, isn't it? Which part? Zahn asked. The bit where you have multiple girls at the same time, or that the whole sordid story gets filmed for TV? That they have no real choice. No say in how things play out. Who goes on what date? Who spends time with me and when? Who has to go home? I make the decisions. I make them for them. Who gave me all that power? And what if I make the wrong decision? I don't want to fuck this up. So let the girls decide. It sounded like such a brilliant idea, but Paige will never go for it, Jason declared. She said the show has to follow the standard format. The eliminations, the dates, the family dinner, the final decision. Zahn broke into a wry smile. There's no format for a dating show with one rockstar bachelor. Her format is for a bunch of farmers who all have to follow the same storyline. You've already messed with that just by being you. And you get to see all the footage, which I'm sure no other bachelor from the previous seasons got to see before he made his decisions. Do the girls suspect when you leave on business, you're actually just rushing back here to watch the bits you missed? I think if you tell Paige to do things differently, she'd accommodate you. She's still under your spell a bit, you know? No. Not Paige? Zahn shrugged. Try her and see. After all, without a bachelor, she has no show. 42. The next morning, Jason was woken by the intercom, informing him he had a visitor. The calm, recorded voice repeated the message as Jason stumbled to the front door. He cursed back, asking it why it couldn't tell him the name of his visitor. All staff and guests wore wristbands after all. If he opened the door and found a fucking frog. Jay, you need to come back. The date, remember? Paige called through the door. Not a frog. Not a guest or staff either, and probably not wearing a wristband if she didn't intend to remain on the island. Time to see if Zahn was right about Paige. Jason palmed open the door. Desire flamed in Paige's eyes as she took in his nakedness. 1 point to Zahn. Let the girls decide, he said. Puzzlement creased Paige's forehead. What? I'm not going to pick the girls for each date. They should get to pick what they want. Offer them the different dates and let them decide which ones they want to go on with me. If they want to. Calais might not want to, and Penelope. Give them a choice. I can't. Some of the excursions are way better than the others. I mean, there's a helicopter ride, a jet boat ride, a charter flight, a Pearl Farm tour with a night in the deluxe safari tent. And all of them include romantic dinners at some really spectacular locations. They'll all pick the best one. Jason shrugged. So make them compete for it. Whoever comes first gets to pick first until they all do. Schedule the dates and that's what we do. But the viewers love the bit where the blokes ask. It's romantic, Paige protested. I can still ask them out, and if you keep the schedule a surprise they'll still look surprised when I ask because they won't know which day, Jason offered. Paige wavered. But they're already competing for you. What else do you expect them to do? I don't know. Something more taxing than putting on makeup and the most revealing clothes they own. Make them run sprints or arrange flowers or mud wrestle or play a chess tournament. I don't care. Making good TV is your job. If they want first pick, they'll try harder. If they don't, that's fine. They don't have to go on a date with me if they don't want to. But every time I choose, it's like going into a brothel and picking someone for the night. It doesn't feel right. Paige eyed him. You've been into a brothel? You? Jason squirmed. Once, all right. A bunch of guys from uni decided to drive out to Kalgoorlie and see the sights. That included the historic brothels. Paige whistled. So somewhere in the wilds of Western Australia, there's a working girl who got paid to sleep with the legendary J. Felix. I didn't say that. I said I went into the brothel. I was a starving uni student. I could barely afford more than 2 beers. An hour with one of those girls? Way beyond my means back then. Nah, I just sat in the bar nursing my beer, making the girls laugh while they were waiting for work. Paige still looked puzzled. You're a strange man, Jay. He shrugged. There's only one of me in all the world. Which is why the world loves me, of course. And you know it. So, are we doing this? All right, she said slowly. But not mud wrestling. Jason sighed. All right. 43. Right, there's been a change of plan, Paige announced. Inwardly, Penny groaned. Without Jay there, she figured it meant no date tonight, but Paige had brought ashore a whole bunch of boxes that were piled up in the kitchen, before she declared the whole structure off limits for the girls. Lazy Luke had smirked at that, until Beck nudged him and said he was making dinner tonight. We're having a little friendly competition, Paige continued. Whoever comes first gets to choose where they go with Jay on their date. Second gets next pick until all the dates are allocated. What do we have to do? Melissa asked. She'd already had a date with Jay. She should automatically go last, Penny fumed. Paige smiled widely. First, you're going to pick a dozen, that's 12 roses from the boxes in the kitchen. Then, you're going to carry them to the top of the ridge, where you'll find 4 vases. You're to arrange your flowers in one vase before coming back down to the bathroom block for fresh water. You'll carry the water in those clamshells on the veranda until the vase is full to the level marked on the side. First girl to fill her vase wins. It sounded like a lot of work for the privilege of picking where you went on a date. What if we don't do it? Penny asked. Then you don't get a date with Jay at all, Paige replied. And be the next girl sent home, she didn't add, but then she didn't have to. They all knew it. Penny sighed. Flower arranging. Couldn't be that hard, could it? Paige lined them up, then released them with a ready, set, go. All 4 of them bolted for the kitchen. Lorelei managed to push Penny out of the way so she could squeeze through the doorway first, but her momentary lead didn't help her. The boxes were taped shut, and Lorelei's acrylic talons were no use. Penny reached automatically for a knife and sliced her way into her box. She counted out the roses, only 10. Another box gave way to her cutting skills, and she had a dozen roses in her arms. She sprinted for the door, with Melissa right behind her. The track to the ridge was wide enough for all 4 of them to run abreast, so Penny didn't mind so much when Melissa kept pace with her. Reaching the top of the ridge, Penny scanned the sand and scrubbed for the vases. Someone had placed them in the only cleared spot, grouped around the base of a dead snag that held a wild beehive in its hollow trunk. The few bees buzzing high over her head didn't seem to care about her though, so Penny ignored them to head back down the dune for water. The clam shells were roughly the size of large soup bowls, and they balanced nicely in her hand just like a bowl. Penny grinned, grabbing a stack of them and proceeded to fill them from the tap before placing them along her arms. She managed 6 before the weight became too much, then strode carefully up the dune. Melissa sprinted past her, looking stunned, but the girl didn't stop. Penny reached her vase with most of the water still in the shells, so she poured it carefully in. They only filled a quarter of the big vase, which meant 3 more trips at least. Penny stacked up her shells and ran back for a refill. This time she had to wait in line behind Lorelei and Calais, who hadn't seen her waitressing technique, so they only carried 1 shell each. Melissa had 2, which she filled before taking off at a fast clip. When Penny's shells were full again, she didn't hurry. Speed wasn't as important as steadiness, so she wouldn't spill. Lorelei bumped into her on her way down the hill, upsetting all 3 of the shells on Penny's right arm. Penny cursed, convinced the bitch had done it on purpose. Lorelei just stuck out her tongue and veered off. Penny poured. Not half full yet. Another 3 trips still. Down she went. The next 2 trips she managed not to spill much, but the water level was still a good inch shy of the fill line, though much higher than anyone else's. One of them barely had an inch in it. One last trip, she promised herself. Then she could choose her date with Jay. That meant she had to stay long enough for that, at least. Penny was halfway up the dune when she heard Paige's shout ring out behind her. "We have a winner!" On top of the ridge, Lorelei held her brimming vase aloft, her face split in a triumphant grin. What? How? It wasn't possible. There was no way Lorelei had carried enough water up that hill to fill a vase more than halfway. Penny reached her vase, which had somehow tipped over, leaving nothing but a trickle of water at the bottom. Yet the sand was dry, showing no signs of spillage. She glared at Lorelei, knowing what the girl had done. Throwing her shells on the sand, Penny marched up to the lying cheating bitch and punched her in her perfect nose. Lorelei went down like a sack of potatoes. Penny was good at mashed potatoes, come to think of it. She reached for the nearest vase, one that still had water in it, and raised it over Lorelei's head. A piercing scream came from Penny's other side, distracting her. Melissa's face was ashen as she clutched her arm. "A bee. It stung me." "Brush it off," Calais advised. "You'll be fine." "No, I won't," Melissa whispered, swaying. "I'm mortally allergic to bees. I need to get to hospital. Now. Or I'll die." Penny could kill Lorelei later. Melissa didn't deserve to die yet. Calais and Penny moved to support Melissa, one under each arm, carrying her down the hill. Calais explained breathlessly to Paige while Beck brought out the first aid kit. Someone found some sort of injector, which Beck stabbed into Melissa's leg, while Penny looked away. Before Penny knew it, Melissa was whisked away in the 4-wheel drive to meet the Royal Flying Doctor Service plane winging its way to the Pearl Farm airstrip. It wasn't until after eating a dinner of Luke's specialty, Burn Barbecue, that Paige came to ask Penny which date she preferred. Penny took one look at the list and picked the helicopter tour to the Pearl Farm on the other side of the peninsula. They'd arrive by helicopter, have a seafood banquet with champagne and cruise the creek the Pearl Farm was named for. Now, if she could just negotiate with the chef to be allowed to prepare the food instead of him. "Lorelei already picked that one," Paige said. "You'll have to pick something else." "She cheated," Penny returned hotly. "She had barely any water in hers, while mine was nearly full. She stole mine and cheated." "On the footage we have, she won, so she picked first," Paige said evenly. Unless someone videoed her doing what you said, there's no proof. And as Melissa has now been airlifted to Perth, we can't redo the race, so the result will have to stand. Make your choice or no date." "What's left?" Penny asked, fighting to keep her voice calm. Now she wanted to break Paige's nose so she matched Lorelai. But if she did that to the show host, she'd be cast as the bitch for sure. "A charter flight to some waterfall or a night in the luxury safari tents at this Pearl Farm." "The tent night," Penny said promptly. She wasn't giving anyone else a chance to spend the night with Jay. "Done," Paige said. No, they weren't, but Penny could be patient. She'd bide her time, but she'd get her revenge on Lorelai. Maybe even on Paige too. If she could get Jay to choose her over Calais and Lorelai, then Paige would have to make her look wonderful in every episode. All she had to do was win the rockstar's heart. He'd already kissed her twice and he'd said he was in love, though he might have been talking about her cooking more than her. Still, he had said love. How hard could it be? 44. So how did the competition go? Jason asked Paige when she appeared in the conference room that had become the film crew's editing studio. He eyed the hard drive in her hands that held the previous day's footage. He'd finally caught up on everything he'd missed over the last week, and some of the interviews had been eye-openers. Melissa had admitted she guessed that Maya would be sent home, after watching Maya distance herself from the rest of them, following her date with Jay. Melissa then went on to say that Jay had hidden depths that she'd like to explore, and she was looking forward to having the opportunity, because he was just the sort of man she could see her future with. Jason wasn't sure whether to believe her or not. He'd gotten the impression that she hadn't liked him all that much, but maybe he'd been wrong. After all, there was a big difference between throwing herself at him like the fangirls did, and hating his guts. He could hardly compare her to a fangirl. Lorelai had giggled about how compatible they were, dropping heavy hints about how much sex they'd had, and how good it was. This was news to Jason. Unless he'd met her before the show and forgotten, entirely possible, given how many groupies he'd slept with over the years, he'd never so much as kissed the woman, let alone had sex with her. Penelope and Calais, those two answered the questions, but they hadn't said much. The only thing that stuck in Jason's mind from those two interviews was the one point they both made: neither of them knew him well enough to say whether he was marriage material for them. More time. He needed more time. Watching the videos was one thing, but he needed to spend more time with all of them before he made up his mind. If he had to make a decision now, he'd pick Melissa, but only because he didn't know the other girls as well. "It's Melissa," Paige said. Jason realized he hadn't heard a word she'd said up until she mentioned Melissa's name. "What?" Irritation crossed Paige's face as she evidently came to the same realization. "I said one of the girls got hurt. She had to be airlifted to hospital in Perth." "Melissa." "No. That couldn't be right." "How?" he demanded. Paige held up the hard disk. "That's what I'm here to see." She plugged in the USB. "Melissa. Gone. So is she coming back?" Jason asked while they waited for the files to load. Paige shook her head. She had a really bad allergic reaction. "They're keeping her in for a few days for observation." She summoned a smile. "At least you won't have to worry about doing another elimination this week." "Yeah, but…" He hadn't intended to send Melissa home. He wanted her to stay. Now, more than ever, he needed to get acquainted with the other girls. "This is raw footage from the camera at the top of the hill. I was at the bottom so I didn't see," Paige warned, her hand hovering over the mouse. Jason nodded. Most of the other stuff he'd seen hadn't been edited either, or at least he didn't think so. Of course, Paige could have held back some of the footage if she hadn't wanted him to see it, but he didn't think she'd be that manipulative. At least, the girl he'd known 6 years ago wouldn't have been. Surely Paige couldn't have changed that much in 6 years. He knew he hadn't. Well, aside from more time in the gym and all that experience in the bedroom and wherever else girls had wanted him. And the romance research in the resort library. Nah, he hadn't changed. Not really. The video began to play, and Jason listened intently to Paige's shouted instructions to the contestants. Flower arranging and running sprints, he asked. Chess not exciting enough for you? Paige hushed him, her eyes on the screen. The footage faded to black, then cut into a different scene. The glass vases grouped around the twisted tree looked like some sort of backdrop for a photo shoot. One of those fashion ones with weird clothes no one would wear unless the apocalypse had truly come and they had nothing else. No half-starved models today though. The camera panned to the camp at the bottom of the hill where Paige stood. Two figures raced across the kitchen veranda, each carrying an armload of flowers. The girls pelted up the hill neck and neck, and Jason recognized Melissa and Penelope. Two vases got flowers before the girls pivoted and dashed for the bathroom. They disappeared from view for a few seconds before Melissa emerged alone, her legs pumping furiously to carry her up the hill. She poured her clamshell of water into her vase, then went back for more. Penelope ambled into sight, arms outstretched like a zombie. Jason laughed out loud when he recognized the arrangement of shells balanced along her arms. She wasn't just a good cook, she'd served at banquets too. Steadily, she ascended the hill with her burden, skillfully tipping the contents into her vase. It might not be chess, but strategy seemed to be important in this particular competition. Jason only wished Paige had found a way to include the mud wrestling. After all, she'd incorporated everything else. Jason grew bored, watching the endless relay of women and water, until one of the girls didn't return to the bottom of the hill. Lorelei waited for the other girls to go down, while she plucked at the hem of her shorts. When she was alone, she crouched between the cameraman and the vases, hiding two of them from sight. The lens panned to follow the rest of the girls laboring up the hill, but a triumphant shout brought Lorelei into focus, holding a filled vase above her head. Penelope's shells dropped to the sand as she lowered her arms, before charging right for Lorelei. Screeching something unintelligible, Penelope punched Lorelei in the face and they both went down, the vase emptying over them both. Jason got his mud wrestling as the two girls rolled around in the damp sand, screeching and slapping and pulling each other's hair. A scream from out of the field of view made the cameraman jump, the footage jerking up with him, before he zoomed in on Melissa. She mumbled something about a bee, before the video ended abruptly. Paige pounded her fist into the table. Damn it. There's nothing. I don't know, Jason drawled, grinning. That was a pretty solid jab from Penelope. I wouldn't have pegged her as a fighter, but it looks like she's had some practice. And you said mud wrestling wasn't a good idea. It wasn't, she replied through gritted teeth. Because of those two, we don't have anything from before the bee sting. Not even the bloody bee. The other camera got plenty of footage on the first aid and stuff, but not the initial injury. I interviewed the girls afterwards, but none of them saw it either. They kept saying how shocked and upset they were at Melissa getting hurt. Well, except for Penelope. She blamed the whole thing on the other girl. Lorelei. The one who won. The one who cheated, you mean? Jason said. That's what Penelope said, but Lorelei denies it. She said she thought the vase was hers, and while she might have mixed them up at first, she's adamant that she didn't that time. And which one would you believe? Jason asked. He knew his answer. Lorelei had already lied on tape about having sex with him. At least, he was pretty sure it was a lie. Surely he'd recognize her if he'd had her before. He might not remember every girl's name, but he remembered faces. And voices. But he didn't know hers. Penelope, now that was different. He knew he'd seen her before. Fairly certain he'd slept with her before. She was the only one who hadn't looked surprised when Paige had introduced him as their rockstar bachelor. But the way her body reacted when he touched her, no, she wasn't hiding secrets like Lorelei was. Paige shrugged. Does it really matter? You're going to go on dates with the girls anyway, and we don't have time to film it all again. Lorelei's the winner, and if we cut that fight scene, her triumph will flow nicely into your date with her in 2 days' time. You two will take a helicopter to Woody Creek Pearl Farm, cruise the creek and the farm until sunset, maybe spot the local crocodile, Nigel, then have a seafood banquet specially prepared for you by the chef at their restaurant. They promised you'd get to open some of their pearl oysters and keep anything you find inside too, so I'm not surprised she picked that one. She could be wearing $1 million pearl to your wedding, if you're lucky." Jason doubted it. He'd spent enough time talking to the pearl farmers. They wouldn't open the top-grade oysters for tourists. They'd be lucky to get jewelry-quality pearls at all. But let the girl believe what she liked. Not like she was particularly truthful in what she told everyone else. That nagging doubt wouldn't leave him alone. Time. He needed more time to get to know her, to get to know all of them better. "What's on for tomorrow then?" he asked. "I have paperwork to fill out for the studio," Paige said sourly. "So we don't get sued for negligence. As if we could keep bees out of an outdoor bush site. But the corporate types in Sydney don't see it that way." "You have fun with your paperwork then. I think I'll charter a plane and head inland." Jason felt a grin lifting his lips. He had the perfect spot in mind. "What? Where? Who with?" Paige demanded. "Dunno. I figure I'll make it a surprise tomorrow when I tell the girls." He strode out, his mind whirling with ideas. "Make sure you take one of my cameramen with you. You can't have them all, you know. You have to pick one. Not even you get to have a harem." Paige called after him. "And don't forget your date with Kylie this afternoon." Jason's grin widened. He never forgot a date. 45. Since Kylie got back to camp after her date with Jay, she hadn't stopped smiling. It was getting on Penny's nerves. To make matters worse, Lorelei strutted around the place like someone had crowned her queen. Penny's punch hadn't broken her nose, though it had split open Penny's knuckles, so Penny had come out of the fight with more injuries than the bitch who started it. It figured. The universe didn't like her much. So when a jet boat roared into the cove and Penny heard Jay shout a cheery good morning, she didn't rise from her seat by the darkened fire pit. "Perfect day for a trip up north. You want to come with me?" Penny lifted her eyes to Jay's face. Yes, he was talking to her. Her heart swelled. Maybe something could go right today. "I'd love to," she breathed. "Where are the others?" Jay asked. Penny shrugged. After breakfast, Lorelei went to put her makeup on. That usually takes half the morning. And Kylie, I think she went for a walk up to the old pearling camp. "I'm back. I'm here." Kylie came barreling down the track, breathless and grinning. "I saw the boat arrive. Is your business at the resort finished for a while? Are you staying with us in the camp again?" So much for the shy girl she'd been. Had Jay popped her cherry last night? Jay winked. "Maybe. But right now I have a helicopter waiting on the landing pad at the Pearl Farm packed with a picnic lunch, ready for adventure. Are you up for it?" "Absolutely." Kylie beamed. "Where's the other girl?" Jay asked. Kylie's face fell. "Lorelei? She's in the bathroom. I'll go get her if you want." "Tell her she has 5 minutes to get in the boat with Baz and the rest of us, or we'll leave her behind," Jay advised. Kylie nodded and trudged to the bathroom. A cameraman stuck his head out of the crew cabin. "Paige will kill me if I don't come along. All dates have to be recorded." He grabbed his gear and lugged it to the fire pit, where he stood beside Penny expectantly. So not just a private adventure for two. All four of them, complete with the fucking photographer. The universe could go fuck itself. Up the arse with a cactus. 46. Crammed into a tiny cabin, being heartily sick into a bag whenever the pilot felt the need to fly them through another tight turn, Penny wished she'd stayed back in camp. She hated flying and helicopters were the worst. Still, she had to admit, the view wasn't too bad out the front window. A multi-layered waterfall trickled from the river at the top of the cliff, through a bunch of tiered lakes to where the river twisted away, far below. If only the river didn't resemble pea soup. Penny's stomach rebelled at the thought of food, so she hunched over a fresh bag. Good thing too, as the helicopter spiraled down to land. Penny was the first out of the helicopter, not stopping until she was more than a dozen meters from those deadly rotors. She wondered if there was any other way to get home. She'd gladly sit here and wait for it. Anything not to have to get back into that helicopter again. "Can we swim here?" Calais asked eagerly, looking from Jay to the pilot. Jay nodded. "Sure. There are crocodiles in the river at the bottom, but until they work out how to fly or swim up a cliff, it's safe above the last set of falls." "Come on." Calais waved to Penny. "Come peek over the lip of the falls with me." Helicopters and now heights? Penny had had her fill of frightening things. She shook her head. Calais lowered her voice. "You got some sick on you in the helicopter. At least come to the river to wash it off." Penny examined her shirt, then eyed the river. "It's green." "So are you. Come on, it'll help. I promise. You'll feel much better if you just wash your face. You don't have to drink it." Sighing, Penny followed Calais to the river, where she made a show of splashing plenty of water on her face, neck and her manky shirt. She was surprised to find it did make her feel better. Refreshed, even. Calais laughed. "See? I told you. Now come check out the view." "Shouldn't we keep close to the helicopter so we don't get lost?" Penny suggested, edging away from the cliff even as Calais splashed toward it. "Wait until Lorelai's discovered we're too far from civilization for her heels to be any use," Calais said. "And Jay and the pilot have unpacked our picnic. Don't forget that." Penny would happily have forgotten. She wouldn't be hungry until the helicopter had flown her home. But she'd spent enough time catering for this lot, with little thanks for her labors. Except from Jay, of course. Let someone else do the work for once. So she stayed by the river, watching Calais admiring the view until she heard Jay calling their names. Lorelai was perched on a picnic blanket, frothing champagne glass in hand. She shot a sour glance at the returned explorers. She'd evidently wanted Jay to herself. Well, tough titties bitch, Penny thought. She wouldn't let Lorelai get her claws into Jay. The others had lunch while Penny looked on, sipping a drink in the shade, as far from the food as possible. When Jay insisted he was going for a swim, Lorelai leaped to her feet, clapping her hands. Penny and Calais exchanged glances and moved to join them. Instead of leading the way to the river though, Jay chose a track at the other end of the clearing. One which led steeply downhill. With ladies first, Jay let Lorelai lead the way down, assuring them they couldn't get lost because the track didn't branch off until the bottom, which was the river anyway. Calais then Penny followed, with Jay bringing up the rear. Lorelai might not be wearing heels, but her rhinestone-encrusted thongs weren't the most practical shoes for hiking. They slowed her down considerably as she slipped, slid and squawked all the way down the track. Penny would have given her a push so she'd break her silly neck at any one of a dozen points, but Calais was more patient. Or maybe she didn't think she was strong enough to push Lorelai over. Lorelai's thongs slapped down on wet rock. "It's the bottom of the waterfall," she exclaimed, loud enough for them all to hear. When they all stood at the bottom together, Jay strode past them toward the sheer cliff. "The best swimming holes up here." He began to climb. Penny couldn't help but stare. Sure, she knew Jay had a sexy body, but the way he worked those muscles, hauling himself from handhold to handhold using just his bulging biceps. Or whatever those arm muscles were called. "Watch out below." Jay dropped his sneakers, socks and shirt over the cliff, and Calais rushed to save them before they ended up in the river. Next he whipped off his shorts and they flooded down too. "It's just us here and the water's warm. Come up for a skinny dip. First one to reach my pool can have me." He disappeared from view. Calais settled on the rock beside Jay's things. "I'm fine here, thanks." "More fool you then," Lorelai cried, clawing her way up to a ledge a third of the way up the cliff. Swimming naked in a slimy green river with who knew what in it. Not to mention the cameraman still at the top of the falls, where he could be watching and recording everything. Penny wanted Jay, but not like that. However, if Lorelei wanted to fall and break her neck all by herself, Penny wanted a front row seat. Decision made, Penny took a seat beside Calais. "Anyone coming, or am I swimming up here by myself again?" Jay called. He stood on the ledge, proud and jutting and just as big as Penny remembered. "Oh God!" Callie squeezed her eyes shut. Lorelei squealed in delight. "Holy shit, it's huge, Jay." "I'm coming." She scrabbled at the edge and rolled her body over the top. With a cry of triumph, she peeled off her clothes and piled them on the cliff edge, setting her candy-pink G-string in pride of place on top. She disappeared from sight, but unfortunately they could still hear her, loud and clear. "Will it fit?" Lorelei cried. Penny wanted to vomit again. For someone who supposedly had so much sex with Jay, she sounded really surprised to see all of him, Calais remarked. Penny paused. "You mean, you think she was lying about all the things she'd done with him?" It figured. Lying, cheating bitch. "Oh yes. I find it hard to believe a word she says sometimes. I mean, her career as an international model? I never heard of her. And all the famous people she said she knows? Jay doesn't know her either." I asked. He said he'd never met her before the speed dating session at the resort. Penny snorted. "So that's what you two were doing last night? You spent your whole date with Jay discussing her?" She couldn't bring herself to name the bitch. Calais blushed. "No, though we did spend a lot of it talking. He's so nice and so easy to talk to. I never intended to tell him half of what I did, but it just sort of came out. About life on my family's farm and my sister." She laughed shakily. "I never talk about her. Not to anyone. It still hurts too much. But with Jay, it was so easy. And he understood, like he knew what it was like to lose someone so close to you. The worry when you don't hear from them, the slow decline until they're gone." "Cancer?" Penny asked. Callie shook her head. "She was in an abusive relationship and she died. Suicide, they told me, but from what I saw of the boyfriend, I'm not sure. Either he drove her to it or he did it. I remember when they met. She adored him. Wouldn't hear a word said wrong about him. And now I'll never know what she thought of him at the end. She didn't even leave a note. Not for me, not for anyone." "That must be hard," Penny managed to say. "What did you say to someone who'd lost someone to suicide, or maybe murder?" Everything she thought of sounded so trite. It still is. Especially wishing there was something I could have done to save her. But she wouldn't let me. She loved him too much and it killed her." Calais' laughter turned bitter. "They say love hurts but not that it kills. When people talk about how powerful it is, they don't say how it can destroy. Like a force of nature. Like this river must be when it floods in the wet season." Penny didn't want to imagine the river in the wet season. Swirling floodwaters, swollen with cyclonic rains that would sweep them away like leaves on the wind. "But love's a good thing," Penny argued, thinking of the thrill she got when Jay touched her. That she wanted more of. That the fucking bitch up there shouldn't be getting. "Not always." "So you're not here for love?" Penny challenged. Calais had to be lying. Callie sighed. "No, I'm not. Look, don't get me wrong. Jay's awesome. It was worth it just to meet him. He's like the perfect big brother you always wished you had. Not that I don't love my brother, I do. And he's awesome too. But Jay, he's like having a superhero for a brother. He's not the sort of guy either of us is likely to meet normally. But somehow we did and he's just perfect. Don't you think?" Moaning and squealing sounded from above. "Sounds like your Mr. Perfect is having sex with Lorelei. That knocks his halo right off in my book," Penny remarked. "Only if I wanted him for myself. He's only doing it to be nice, you know. He said he's too soft-hearted to turn a girl down. Doesn't want her to feel bad about herself, so if he can, he does. He's gone to so much trouble to make this trip memorable for us." Kylie waved at the falls. "I mean, just look at this place." She froze, staring at the crocodile warning sign. Are there really crocodiles here, or was he joking about that? Penny pointed across the river, where 2-meter-long beasts were sunning themselves on a rock. "You could ask Penny Croc and Calais Croc over there." Calais squinted at the crocodiles. "They don't look very big. If those are the babies, where's their mum?" "Nah, those are freshwater ones. They won't hurt you. I don't think they get much bigger than that. It's the salties that eat people. Those are what you have to watch out for." Calais stared at her. "Did you used to live up here? You know so much about them." Penny nodded. "Headland, then here. Or Broome at least. Before I joined a cruise ship to cook my way around the world. At first, I laughed about crocodiles being an important part of the safety briefing, but that was before I saw one of the big ones. They're fast and deadly. If they get their teeth into you, you're a goner." They sat there in silence for a few minutes before Calais said softly, "We can't let Lorelei get her teeth into Jay. He doesn't deserve someone like her. I don't know who he'll send home next. If it's me, can you promise me something? If it comes down to just you and her, don't let him choose her." "I swear," Penny said instantly. "Same though. If he sends me home and it's just you and her, don't let the bitch have him." "Deal," Calais said. They both watched as a bright green bottom appeared over the edge, bisected by a pink G-string. Penny and Calais fought not to laugh as Lorelei, her back covered in slime from crown to knees, climbed down the cliff. When she reached the bottom, she turned to face the other two girls, fanning her flushed face. "Oh my God, that was incredible," she said. "Like having a jackhammer inside me. You can't imagine what it feels like." She smirked. "We're going to have one incredible wedding night. You'll have to watch it on TV, seeing as you won't be invited." It took her a moment to realize what she'd said. "To the wedding. You won't be invited to the wedding. And there won't be cameras on the wedding night. I'd never sink so low as to need to do porn films." Calais managed not to laugh, but Penny wasn't that polite. "Yeah, good luck with that," Penny said. The only way Lorelei would be Jay's bride was over her dead body. And now Calais too. The bitch didn't stand a chance. 47. For the next few days following the trip to the falls, Penny and Calais avoided Lorelei as much as possible, leaving her at the camp with Beck and Luke while they hiked up to the bluff and watched for whales. Calais had spotted a couple before Penny saw a single one, but more and more were swimming past, heading for the other side of the archipelago, to their breeding grounds. Jay remained at the resort, not staying at the camp at all, to Penny's dismay. That meant he wasn't with Lorelei though, which was a good thing. He'd collected her for their date and returned her right after, with a casual wave to the other girls before he headed back to the resort by boat. But when Paige arrived, with 2 new cameramen in tow, Penny paid attention. She and Calais spotted the boat in the distance, so they had time to make their way to the beach in time to meet the boat. "Time for the family dinner," Paige said, trudging up the beach. "Are you feeling nervous yet?" Calais' jaw dropped. "We get to meet Jay's family?" Paige shrugged. "Standard part of the show. The bachelors get to show the girls off and get outside opinions from the people they know and trust. More work for me because I have to interview anyone who's willing to offer an opinion, but this is where things get mixed up a bit, because they usually see things Jay won't because they're not in Louvre." Penny couldn't help but smile. No member of Jay's family would want him anywhere near Lorelei. She and Calais had a chance though if they played their cards right. Mums and grandmas always loved a girl who could cook, something Penny had in the bag. Calais would probably just clam up, which suited Penny fine. Traditionally, this is where you girls get to cook for them all too, but because dinner's at the resort, I'm not sure. Jay will let us know when we arrive. She clapped her hands. "Chop chop. Get your things, girls. You're moving back to the resort for the night. We'll be back at camp tomorrow though. Can't have you getting too cozy." 48. Penny almost moaned at the sheer pleasure of having a hot shower again. It had been weeks. Not that the camp showers had been cold, but it just wasn't the same. So she missed civilization. She was a city girl, she was supposed to. For the first time, she looked forward to the end of filming, just so she could have all the everyday comforts she missed. Like hot water, a fridge, an oven, electric lights, not having to restrain herself from killing Lorelai in her sleep. Reluctantly, she turned off the taps and stepped out of the shower, wondering what to wear. She'd brought 2 dresses for the trip, both more suitable for dates than family dinners. One of them would have to do though, seeing as there wasn't a clothing shop on the island and the souvenir shop only sold swimsuits, board shorts and t-shirts. The black or the blue? That decision was easy, the blue of course. Her little black dress was definitely for dates, and she had one with Jay this week. The blue would have to do. Hoping she still remembered how to do it, she curled her hair into a twist on the back of her head and secured it with a silver clip that she knew stood out against her dark hair, though she couldn't see it herself. She dug out her makeup and set to work. Not too much, she didn't want his family to think she shoveled it on the way Lorelai did, but just enough to show, so they could see that she'd made an effort to look good. She didn't have much jewelry, so she didn't bother wearing any. She dug out her heels, which had languished in the bottom of her bag since they'd boarded the boat for Camp Romance, and slipped them onto her feet. It felt strange after so long in flat shoes, so she practiced striding across the room in them, until she felt like she wasn't going to trip on every other step. It's not like they were 6 inches high. They were a fairly modest 3, she thought, peering down. A knock sounded at the door. Was it time already? Who is it? Penny quavered. I'm Adam, the hotel porter, ma'am. Reception sent me with a delivery for you. A porter she didn't know. Penny waved the door open. He held out a small bag, about the size of his hand. By his side, he held 2 more. Who's it from? She asked, taking the bag and peering inside. Reception, ma'am, he repeated tersely. Reception. Right. She thanked him and retreated into her room, letting the door hiss closed behind her. Puzzled, she tipped the bag out on the bed. All it contained was a black box, tied shut with a coal-colored bow. She untied it and tugged off the lid. And gasped. Inside was a pearl necklace with matching earrings. The pearls were an unusual silvery blue that she'd never seen before, set in brushed silver. Penny held the box up beside her face, staring intently at her reflection in the mirror. They were a perfect match for both her and the dress. Who had sent them? And how had they known? Deciding that she would wear jewelry after all, she donned the timely gift, tucked a stray wisp of hair behind her ear, and ventured to the Dampier room for dinner. 49. Penny smoothed her skirt before walking into the Dampier room, aware of the cameras recording everything. She breathed a sigh of relief when she saw she wasn't the last to arrive. Aside from the camera crew, there were only 3 other people present at the table set for 8. Jay, Calais and a woman who looked around Penny's age sat beside Calais. Jay's sister perhaps? Penelope, this is my hotel manager Zahn Lane, Jay said, banishing that idea. She takes care of the resort while I'm off enjoying myself with you ladies. Zahn rolled her eyes. I take care of the resort regardless. I have yet to see you do a day's work since you arrived. She had an English accent, a strong contrast to her tanned athletic appearance. Penny would have pegged her as Aussie to the core. Jay grinned. One of the perks of being the boss. So Maya had left, to be replaced by her. Penny shook hands with the woman, wondering how someone so young could get a job managing a place like Romance Island Resort. Not through sleeping with Jay by the sound of things. Calais didn't scrub up too badly, Penny decided, eyeing the girl beside Zahn. She'd let her hair down and looked like she'd taken advantage of being in civilization to wash and style it properly, so it fell in soft curls around her face. She smiled at Penny, nervously tucking a curl behind her ear, and Penny saw that she wasn't the only one who'd received pearls. Calais were a different color though, not blue but a pale gold, set in gold instead of silver. She had a matching pendant around her neck too, that gave her dark wine-colored dress a startling splash of brightness. If Calais got to sit beside Jay, Penny would do the same, she decided, sinking onto the empty chair on Jay's right. Her bottom had barely touched the cushion before Jay leaned over and whispered, "I take it you liked my gift?" Penny glanced at her necklace. "Not from reception." "From Jay, of course." "Absolutely. Thank you," she replied. Jay grinned. "I was bored at the Pearl showroom the other night with Lorelei, and I didn't know pearls came in so many colors instead of just white, so I thought you ladies might like something too." He looked uncertain. "Are they okay?" "I don't usually do jewelry because I don't know what to buy. The girl at the counter picked these out for me when I described you." How precisely had he described her for a girl she'd never met to pick something so perfect? "Oh God, how much had it cost?" Penny squirmed in her seat. "It's lovely." "Really?" "Good." Jay sighed, glancing around. "Is it just the four of us for dinner? Where's everyone else?" The seats across the table didn't remain unoccupied for long. The two IT guys crept in to take the seats across from Calais and Zahn, followed by Jackie, one of the senior maids Penny remembered from when she worked here. Penny received a nod of recognition from the woman and wanted to sink under the table, but she was forced to smile as Jay made introductions. Just as long as Jackie didn't mention Penny's previous work experience, it would be okay, Penny promised herself. "Oh, are you here already?" Lorelei sang out, prancing into the room. She wore an over-the-top evening gown that was slit to the waist, showing off her surgically enhanced boobs. Strategically placed clusters of rhinestones held the dress together at shoulder, hip and navel, and Lorelei wore earrings to match, with not a single pearl in sight. Hadn't Jay bought her jewelry? He'd hated his date that much, that he'd decided to buy gifts for the other girls instead? Penny stifled a grin. Lorelei's hair looked like a mop that had gotten tangled in the mangroves after a cyclone, half up, half down, with tendrils sticking out like they'd been windblown that way. Penny guessed it must be something fresh out of the latest fashion magazine, because Lorelei didn't look the least bit flustered when everyone stared. "You must be Jay's mother, brothers and sister. I'm delighted to meet you." Lorelei swanned around the table, shaking hands with Jay's family of staff, oblivious to the coughing fit Jackie faked to cover her laughter. Jay waited until Lorelei was seated across from him to correct her. "Oh." In one syllable and its accompanying sneer, Lorelei managed to convey her complete disgust for anyone who worked in a hotel. Penny wanted to kick her under the table. A normal person would have at least had the grace to look embarrassed at such a stupid mistake, but not Lorelei. A waiter wandered in with a bottle of champagne and proceeded to fill everyone's glasses. Well, with no vehicles on the island, no one had to be the designated driver tonight, Penny thought, taking a big gulp of her wine. She felt Jackie's eyes on her, so she took another defiant gulp before setting the glass down. "So what have you been doing with yourself after you left here?" Jackie asked. Penny opened her mouth to answer. Lorelei tittered. "Did you used to work here, Penelope?" "We were both maids together in the housekeeping department for a season until Penny left," Jackie said, lifting her wineglass. "A maid? Now I know where you learned to fight. You must have had to fight off some of the determined male guests, I'm sure. After all, in a place like this they'd expect full-service maids, right?" Lorelei laughed. Penny wanted to punch her again, but knew she couldn't with the cameras watching. "Some of the guests have more hormones than sense," Jackie agreed. "But the resort has always had a firm policy on not letting the staff fraternize with guests. Tonight's an exception, of course, because Mr. Felix likes to blur the lines. We're all family here, he says." "Family?" Jay repeated. "Yes, we are. Jackie's my housekeeper on top of her normal job, so she makes sure I don't burn the place down. Cam and Seb over there make sure we have communications and enough TV channels, so we don't get bored and cause too much trouble, while Zahn keeps everyone in line. Even me." "Bullshit," Zahn replied. "No one's managed to keep Jay in line yet. Isn't that why he wants one of you ladies? Making him behave sounds like a wifely duty for sure." Calais giggled, but was drowned out by Lorelei's loud laughter. "I'd be willing to give it a go." Lorelei exclaimed. Over my dead body, thought Penny, but she forced a smile for the camera. Look, here comes the first course, Zahn said. You should have seen the chefs when I told them you said you wanted a banquet for 8. We had to add a few courses to make sure each of them got to design their own course. Apparently everyone wants to be a celebrity chef, and all it takes is one reality TV show to make you famous, or so I hear. Penny fervently hoped so. The way things were going tonight, with Jay ignoring her to talk to Calais or his staff most of the time, she knew she wouldn't be winning a rock star out of the show. But her own cooking show would be a cool consolation prize. A resounding clang gonged through the room, drawing everyone's eye to the door. The orange-splattered chef didn't seem to care that he dropped his platter, which 2 waiters scrambled to clean up. No, Patel's eyes were transfixed on Penny. Lorelei giggled. He sure looks shocked to see you, Penelope. Do you know the chef too? Feeling everyone's eyes on her, especially Jay's, Penny swallowed. She had to keep cool. Oh, he's just my ex, she said with what she hoped sounded like nonchalance. We broke up a year ago. I didn't know he still worked here. A lie, but a necessary one. He hadn't spoken to her since she'd stopped working at the resort, so she'd assumed that meant they were over. But the way he stared at her now, his eyes full of hurt, made her wonder. And Jay had noticed too. Fuck. Fuck, faggoty fuck. She spent the next 15 minutes studiously ignoring Patel, until he left the room and a different chef brought the next course in. Go fuck yourself, universe, Penny thought, hoping the dinner would be done soon. Oh, and universe? Use 2 cactuses this time. 50. Thanking the whole sky full of lucky stars that ordeal was finally over, Penny settled at a pub table to sip her beer, wishing she could have a cigarette. The night was officially a disaster, so she may as well drink herself into oblivion until she could sink into a soft hotel bed. Right, how about some fun? Paige gushed. Penny swore under her breath. Nothing that woman thought up was her idea of fun. More likely, she'd thought up some fresh torture to put them through. Spin the bottle, a wet t-shirt contest to rival the one at the Roebuck Bay Hotel, a game of bingo. Karaoke. Paige squealed, yanking away a makeshift curtain from the wall, revealing a TV screen. Great. At least with the wet t-shirt contest, she'd have had an excuse to pour her drink over Lorelei's perfect head. Now all she could do was hope no one asked her to sing because she had no musical talent at all. Who's first? Paige scanned the group. Penny deliberately didn't make eye contact. Oh, come on. It'll be fun. I never turned down a chance to sing, Jay said, rising. Someone pick me a song. Paige giggled. Actually, I already programmed a few in to get the party started. She aimed a remote control at the screen, holding out the microphone for Jay in her other hand. Something easy to start with. Jay snorted as the song title came on the screen. Chia's Necessary Evil, their first big hit. He didn't need the words for this one, belting out the words with what Penny thought looked like bitterness. Didn't he like the song? It was one of his, after all. As the last words died away, Paige shouted, "The next one's a duet. Who's going to sing with our rock star?" Penny shook her head, tightening her grip on her pint. Calais refused to. Lorelei was nowhere to be seen, probably repainting her face in the toilets, Penny decided. She wondered what would happen when the girl ran out of makeup at the beach camp. Or maybe her suitcase was full of the stuff, so she'd be able to hide behind her mask for months if need be. The Magic Carpet song from Aladdin came on, and Penny fought not to laugh. A Disney duet? Hardly suitable for a rock star. Not even Jay would be able to pull off a proper performance if he didn't know the words. Yet he did, his voice soaring through the male part as effortlessly as if the part had been written for him. When the female part appeared on the screen, he offered the microphone to Calais, then Penny, but both refused again. He shrugged, grinned, and launched into the funniest falsetto Penny had ever heard. "Princess J.S. mine." Paige hooted, clapping. Penny found herself sniggering, then outright laughing, as Jay fluttered his eyelashes like an experienced drag queen. Wait, was he? No, he couldn't be. He'd risen to fame when he was only 18 or 19, barely legal age to go into any of the clubs in King's Cross, let alone become a seasoned performer in one. And everyone knew how much he loved women. Someone slammed a glass on the table behind Penny, dragging her attention from Jay. "I knew I'd seen you before," Cam exclaimed. "You're the accounts girl from Hooker's Real Estate." Lorelei turned white. "Nah, that's not me," she said, her eyes darting every which way like the lying bitch she was. "Yeah. I'd know that butterfly anywhere." Cam pointed at the tattoo spread across Lorelei's clearly visible cleavage. "Even if those are bigger than I remember. Did you get a boob job? They look awesome." He stared avidly at Lorelei's breasts. "No, you must have mixed me up with someone else." Cam grabbed Seb's arm. "Hey mate. Doesn't she look like the girl from Hookers?" Seb turned and squinted at Lorelei. "Nah, the girl from Hookers disappeared, remember? I had to hack her accounts for the police when they were trying to find her. The investigation ended when they found out she'd left the country." Cam grinned. "Yeah, to get a boob job looks like. Don't you think she has incredible tits now?" Seb seemed less enthusiastic about them. "Very nice." He turned his attention back to Jay's performance. "So is that why you got the implants? For the show?" Cam asked eagerly. Lorelei squirmed in her seat, to Penny's delight. Her discomfort only lasted a moment before she jumped up and exclaimed, "Oh, that's my song." She trotted up to take the microphone from Jay. Penny ignored Lorelei's simpering rendition of some mass-produced pop song to focus on the IT guy's discussion behind her. "You shouldn't have scared her off like that. I was this close, man." Cam held his fingers millimeters apart. Seb glanced around as if making sure they weren't overheard. The accounts girl from Hookers ripped them off for a fortune. She was stealing from all the client accounts, transferring the money into an offshore account. It wasn't until she left that someone noticed, and they needed me to unlock her profile. If she isn't the same girl, you're the one who scared her off, and if she is, she wouldn't want us knowing, would she? Cam looked stricken. But if she is, you think she's after Mr. Felix's money? Shouldn't we tell him? Tell me what, guys? Jay asked easily, flopping into the chair beside Penny without spilling a drop of his beer. I should sing for Disney? 'Cause I'm not taking her as a backup singer. He jerked his head at Lorelei, who was now bumping and grinding to a song from The Little Mermaid. Ugh. No, you shouldn't. We think she did the same thing as Maya. Ripped off her employer and disappeared. Or she looks like a chick who did. Seb gave a tight smile. What should we do? Jay shrugged. Mention it to Zahn. She's friends with one of the police constables in town. They don't like me much. She'll sort it and see if Lorelei is a criminal or just looks a lot like one. He drank deeply, then slammed his half-empty glass on the table. Right. This song's mine, and you're doing it with me. He grabbed Penny's hand and hauled her up to the front. She protested, but she was too shocked at what she'd heard to put much energy into resisting. Lorelei, wanted by the law? Oh, this was too good. To be rid of her biggest adversary by getting the bitch arrested, tonight was looking up. Summer loving. Jay shouted as he handed Penny a microphone. What? The music started and Penny recognized the Grease medley. At least it was something she vaguely knew. Jay's arm slid around her waist. The words are on the screen if you forget them, and there aren't any cameras tonight. Copyright of the songs or whatever. Even if they did film this, they couldn't show it on TV. Just relax and have fun. He winked and launched into the song like he'd sung it 100 times before. He even had the John Travolta dance moves. Penny stood there mesmerized until he pointed at the screen. Her turn to sing. Oh right. Penny managed to mangle her lines before the medley mercifully moved on to Greased Lightning. Good thing it was completely Jay's part for a bit, because that hip thrust ass wiggle combo he had going on meant she wasn't staring at any boring screen. Wait, what? Oh, her turn to sing again. That Summer Nights duet thing. Flustered, she fixed her gaze on the screen and tried to remember how the song went. Jay's arm around her didn't make it any easier, but he didn't move away, so she figured she must have done okay. At the end, he let go of her to applaud her performance, and Penny clumsily clapped right back. God, she'd be dreaming of him tonight. What would it feel like if he did that hip thrust on top of her, or behind her, or anywhere, anytime? She sank into a seat before her weak knees gave out. What felt like only a few minutes later, Paige announced the evening's entertainment was over, and Penny rose. Calais was already on her feet, smothering a yawn. Lorelei was nowhere in sight. Maybe she'd done a runner, Penny gloated. If she hadn't, someone had to tell the police about her. 51. When the sun rose, Penny had already made her decision. She wouldn't call the police because that's not how things were done at Romance Island Resort, something that had been drummed into her long ago when she'd worked here as a lowly maid. No, she'd dump this mess in the lap of that new manager and let her handle it. That way Penny wouldn't be implicated if Lorelei got arrested, so Penny wouldn't look bad in front of all the viewers when the show went to air. She wasn't a tattletale like that righteous bitch Audra. Her thongs slapped against the soles of her feet as she marched across the foyer to the manager's office. Mr. Meyer had always kept the door closed, forcing you to knock and wait for permission to enter. This new manager kept the door wide open, so Penny didn't need to knock to get the woman's attention. Her eyes were already firmly fixed on her visitor. Yes, the manager asked. I'm Penelope. One of the girls here for the show, Penny began. Look, I couldn't help overhearing last night, but two of the staff here were talking about one of the other girls on the show. They said she looked like a criminal, the manager interrupted. You're the fourth person this morning to tell me. Turns out Lorelei is none other than Brooke Barnett, wanted for stealing as a servant, taking thousands of dollars from the company she worked for. What made her think she could hide on a reality TV show is beyond me, but some people are just plain stupid, I guess. And you might want to pack your things just in case the show gets cancelled over this. Jay just left to find the production manager, to give her a piece of his mind. No. They couldn't cancel the show. This was her only chance to get her reputation back. Where is she? Penny asked. The manager shrugged. She set up shop in one of the conference rooms. The Sunset Room, I think. Penny nodded her thanks and hurried out. She had to distract Jay, stop him before he could ruin this for her. 52. Is this one big joke to you? Jason demanded, striding into the conference room. Paige jumped, spilling her coffee. She looked tired, Jason was glad to see. Laying the drama on thick for the show. Playing me like a fucking idiot. I promised you a finale to remember, but you lied. No criminals. No one wanted by the police. And you tried to set me up with a thief. An unprincipled bitch who steals from the people who trust her. Jason hadn't been this angry since he found out what Gaia had done to Flavia. No, since he jumped out of a fucking helicopter. Answer me, or get the fuck off my island. The deal is over. You can stick your show up your boss's ass. Paige mumbled something unintelligible. Through clenched teeth, Jason insisted she repeat it. Louder. I didn't know, she whispered. Bullshit. I didn't. Paige protested. Someone in the studio handles background checks for guests on the show. I don't know how they missed this. Maybe they didn't have time to check, or maybe she gave a fake name, or… Yeah, she gave a fake name all right. Lorelei instead of bloody Brooke. An accounts payable clerk, not a model like she said she was. What other bullshit have you tried to sell me that I don't know about yet? The panic in Paige's eyes confirmed Jason's suspicions. She hadn't known about Lorelei Brooke bitch who was leaving his island right now, but she was hiding something. The ring, she squeaked. What ring? I mentioned to the jewelers in town that it might be good advertising for them if one of their pieces was used in the show's finale, if there was a proposal. One of them came through. The hotel manager has it in her safe. I didn't trust the room safes for something that expensive. It's more than I earn in a year. Paige swallowed. That's the only thing I haven't told you. I've been straight with you from the beginning, I swear. You've had access to all the show footage just like I promised. We have to finish the show. Now she looked terrified. Jason's anger ebbed. Sure, he was pissed off, but he hadn't meant to scare her. What did she think he'd do, hit her? Not fucking likely. You want to line up those 3 girls tonight so I can send one home? I don't think so. I don't want that girl on my island for another minute. Get rid of her. Take her to the police lockup where scum like her belongs. But you have to be there. To look shocked at. Jason shook his head. You don't want me swaying on your show, and I have nothing to say to the girl. Get rid of her, and maybe I'll still agree to do the final proposal like we discussed. Maybe. Were those tears in Paige's eyes? Jason softened a little more. But our date? What about our date? A new voice cried. Penelope stumbled into the room, wild-eyed. I'm still supposed to have a date with you. I want to make a meal for you in front of the film crew. Great. Now Jason had 2 crying women. All right, 1 date. That's all. And the finale. When you choose the girl you like best, Paige piped up hopefully. Yeah, whatever, Jason grumbled, throwing his hands into the air. Just get rid of her. He stalked out. 53. Penny stared at Paige, before the production manager held out a box of tissues. They both said nothing while they wiped their tears away and blew their noses, but the tension in the room hadn't left with Jay. If anything, it had intensified. What's going to happen with the show? Penny ventured. Paige took a deep breath, summoning back some of the hardness she normally exhibited. The show must go on. You heard him. You 2 have a date and then he'll make his choice. A crafty smile appeared on Paige's lips. He won't do what he's supposed to, and send her away like a normal elimination. The viewers won't understand why though. We have to handle this right. How much do you know? Calculating eyes evaluated Penny over Paige's cup of coffee. That Lorelai isn't who she says she is and she's wanted by the police, Penny said slowly, hoping it was the right response. Does the other girl, Calais? Does she know? Penny shook her head. I don't think so. What would it take for you to forget what you know for a few hours, so you look properly shocked when the police come to arrest her? Money. Fame. Jay. I want you not to make me into the show's bitch when it goes to air, Penny blurted out. Paige choked out a laugh. The show's bitch? Penny reddened. Every reality TV show has a bitch. Someone the audience loves to hate. Make it Lorelai, not me. Even if I don't win. You don't think he'll pick you either, Paige said. What are you in this for then? It was now or never. Penny took a deep breath. I'm a chef. Or at least an apprentice one. I want to finish my apprenticeship with one of the best, but they'll never take me on. What I need is an edge. To be famous for my cooking. I want a spot on a cooking show or one of the contests. Like the one you usually host when you're not matchmaking rock stars. She let out a breath she hadn't even known she'd been holding, but she didn't dare uncross her fingers. She needed all the luck she could get. Paige would never go for it. Penny was asking too much. Paige regarded Penny, then nodded once. All right. You and Calais and Lorelai dress up for today's elimination as if nothing had happened. And no matter what happens once the cameras start rolling, you act like it's a bigger surprise than the rock star you want, the day you first found out his name. Deal, Penny said, hoping the woman would keep her word. Her stomach roiled uneasily. After all, in the TV industry, what was her word worth? Either of them could be lying. Maybe even both. If she was, then Penny had only one way to win in this show. She had to win not just the viewers' hearts but Jay's as well. Jay would help her fulfill her dream, she was sure of it. Jay had to choose her instead of Calais. Calais, who'd been her ally against Lorelai since the beginning. But all was fair in love and war, Penny reasoned. And when it came to Jay's love, it definitely was war. To the death if need be. 54. Paige lined all three of them up on the lagoon beach, in a secluded spot you didn't see from the path until you were there. That meant you couldn't see anyone creeping up on you either, Penny knew, but she didn't have anything to hide. It's not like she was making out with anyone on the beach. Not today, anyway. Lorelai wore a triumphant smile, glancing sideways at Penny as if she knew a particularly juicy secret. Penny wanted to punch through those perfectly capped teeth, break that surgically shaped nose and kick the bitch in her silicone-enhanced boobs. But with the cameras rolling, she couldn't let her face say that. Instead, she kept her head down, intent on smoothing the sand with her toes. She hoped she looked more apprehensive than angry. If Lorelai wasn't going to be arrested today, Penny might have been eliminated by Jay instead. Now who had a juicy secret? Penny forced herself not to smile, hugging her delicious knowledge to herself. "Where's Mr. Felix?" one of the cameramen asked. The others shrugged. "Bloody humid out here. Too hot to wait in the sun for him." Faintly, Penny heard the whine of a jet boat. The police, she hoped. That meant Lorelai wouldn't have the luxury of a helicopter ride to jail. No, she'd have a rough jet boat ride during which she'd almost definitely get soaked and seasick, before the police drove her down the red rough-as-hell gravel road back to town. She smiled at her toes, deciding that the chipped polish should be redone tonight to celebrate Lorelai. No, Brooke, getting her just desserts. Karma's a bitch, baby, and none deserve it more than you, she thought. Time stretched interminably as perspiration trickled between her shoulder blades while she stood in the hot sun, wishing she'd brought a hat or something she could use to fan herself. Would the film crew tell her off for going to stand in the shade? Penny glanced over and met Paige's hard gaze, firmly fixed on her. No, Paige was watching her every move. No rest for the indebted. Penny sighed. It would be worth it if Paige came through. All she had to do was cook Jay the perfect meal on their date tonight, and she'd have everything she could ever want. Him, her reputation back, and happiness. Maybe she'd even offer Jay a blowjob for dessert. That's how Lorelai had seduced him, with sex. Two could play at that game. Or one, seeing as Brooke's time on the island was ticking away. Victory was Penny's, she knew it. Shy Calais didn't stand a chance. Steps crunched on the path, and a cameraman backed into view. The hotel manager marched onto the sand next, wearing a particularly grim expression. Behind her strode two equally grim-faced police officers. Penny's mouth dropped open in genuine shock. The two hulking men weren't locals from the station in town. Last time she was here, the Cape Levesque Road Patrol had a woman on it. If she'd ever seen either of these men before, she'd have volunteered to be arrested. "Brooke Burnett, otherwise known as Lorelai Lovelace, you're under arrest," one uniformed, muscle-bound hottie said. Calais gave an audible gasp. "She's what?" Brooke managed a shaky laugh. "You're joking. You have me mixed up with someone else. I'm not this other girl. Brooke. Whatever her name is. I haven't stolen anything or killed anybody. I've done nothing wrong." Her voice ended in a hysterical shriek as hottie number 2 snapped handcuffs on her wrists. "We can discuss that at the station, miss," he said. Bracketing her like the world's most drool-worthy bookends, they each took one of Brooke's arms and escorted her back the way they'd arrived. One cameraman followed them, but the other kept his lens on Penny and Calais. As soon as they were out of sight, Penny let her breath hiss out. The hard bit was over, she hadn't given the game away to Brooke. Now she had to play her part until Paige was satisfied. "Oh my God, was that real?" Penny asked Calais. "Were those real police officers?" Calais sniffled, wiping away tears. "Yes. Detectives from Perth. The last time I saw that uniform was when they came to my house to tell us about my sister. Her sister had been arrested for something horrible, too? Then Penny remembered Callie's sister was dead. She wrapped her arms around Callie in what she hoped looked like a sympathetic hug. She tried to keep the triumph off her face, but it was hard. After all, Lorelei was gone. Callie clung to her for what felt like ages, until the jet boat roared into life and headed off. The cameraman returned, and Paige directed Penny to a spot under a tree, where she was required to babble endlessly about how shocked she was about Lorelei's arrest, her hopes for her relationship with Jay, and how she felt terribly betrayed by being so close to a criminal all this time. Penny summoned her best worried look as she said she hoped Jay wouldn't take his favorite's defection too hard. Not that she called Lorelei Jay's favorite. God no. That was loser talk. And she was no loser. Not this time. No, this time Penny was going to be the winner who takes all, because by God she deserved it this time. Finally, things were going right. 55. It felt surprisingly comfortable to be back at Camp Romance, putting on her lipstick in front of the tiny bathroom mirror. Penny wanted to dance. Finally, she was getting her date with Jay. And not just any date. A romantic dinner, followed by an evening together in a luxury tent. One with electricity and a king-sized bed. If everything went right, that bed would come in very handy for showing Jay just how compatible they were, in every way. Callie couldn't compete with that. Penny climbed behind the wheel of the old four-wheel drive, careful to avoid brushing the rust spots which would show on her dress. She turned the key and instead of rumbling to life, the engine clicked. She wrenched at the key again but got the same response. Oh God! What was wrong with the car? She was supposed to meet Jay at the Pearl Farm. He'd be waiting for her. This couldn't happen now. Luke, she called, hoping the camp manager was around and hadn't gone fishing. What's wrong with the car? Nothing's wrong with the car, he said, taking a long pull on his beer and settling deeper into his chair on the veranda. It won't start. There is something wrong with it, Penny insisted. I'm supposed to be at the Pearl Farm in a few minutes, with that car. It took 10 minutes of alternately begging and threatening to get Luke off his lazy ass and into the driver's seat. He turned the key, coaxing more clicks out of the car, then climbed out again. Flat battery. It won't start. Penny's heart sank. Don't we have spare batteries? I'm sure I saw one in the kitchen. It had one of those portable fridges running off it. Nah, don't know what you're talking about, Luke drawled, taking another drink. Penny's temper rose. It was full of those beers last time I looked, no food at all. Where is it now? She scanned the kitchen, but the cooler was gone. Where is it? She repeated. Beck marched up the veranda, drawn to the brewing argument. Are you looking for Luke's beer fridge? He hooked it up to the car battery this morning, when the others went flat. It'll be in the shade beside one of the front tires. The car battery's flat too, Penny said. That got Beck's attention. What? I'm supposed to head into town in the morning to get more supplies. You mean we're stuck here? I need to get to the Pearl Farm today before dark. We better not be stuck here. Penny glared at Luke. Luke didn't look the slightest bit repentant. So radio for help then. Or go for a walk. The radio needs batteries, you fool, Beck said through gritted teeth. And it's miles to the Pearl Farm. In the dark. With wild bulls in the bush. And snakes? Luke shrugged. Not my problem. I have all the beer I need to do me till morning. Beck looked as furious as Penny felt. You won't have a job by morning. If I have to walk to the farm, I'll call the office and tell them what you did. That you haven't done a damn thing since you got here except drink beer and try to sleep with the guests. This is the last straw, Luke. Beck turned to Penny. You stay here and I'll get the guys to bring a spare battery when they drop me off. Oh, and if you want to kick him in the balls a few times from me while you're here with him and no witnesses, be my guest. Much though Penny wanted to beat the shit out of Luke, she didn't want to miss her date with Jay. "No, I'll walk," she said. "How far is it?" "About 15–20 minutes," Luke said. "Not far at all." Penny nodded. She could manage that, even in a dress. She looked at Beck. "If the ball kicking's still happening, would you do a bit for me?" Beck grinned. "Gladly." So Penny set off, figuring she had about an hour of daylight left. She'd only need half of that if Luke was right. An hour later, still trudging along the track, Penny decided that Luke was wrong. She'd also decided that he was a dodgy bastard, and she hoped Beck beat him to death by the time she got back. She was late for her date with Jay, starving for a dinner she should have eaten half an hour ago, and her mouth was too dry to swear at Luke, the universe, and everything else. Still, she kept going, as the moon gave her just enough light to see the track in front of her, but with no other lights in view, she wasn't sure how much farther she had to go until she reached the farm. She lost track of time, concentrating just on putting one foot in front of the other, so when she rounded a clump of bushes and found herself on a lawn, an actual lawn, Penny dropped to her knees. Finally she glimpsed lights up ahead, and heard the sound of running water, which turned out to be the artificial waterfall feeding the swimming pool. The lights were the exit signs in the restaurant, which had closed for the night by the look of it. The staff lived on site though, she was sure of it, so Penny stumbled through the compound until she found a house that the signs proclaimed was private. That meant accommodation for staff, not tourists, she was certain. She raised a weary arm to knock on the door. And again. And a third time, with some desperation. If no one answered, she was going to curl up on the veranda and cry herself to sleep. This was the worst night in the history of bad nights. The door creaked open. "What is it?" a woman's voice croaked. "I've come from the camp up on the ridge. The car broke down and there's no battery for the radio." Tears leaked from Penny's eyes. "I was supposed to be here this afternoon, to see Jay." Is he still here?" The woman tugged her pajama top down over her tummy. "Jay? You mean Jay Felix? He was here hours ago. Had a couple of drinks while he was waiting, but when you didn't turn up, he made Baz take him over to the camp by boat. Baz was back before it was dark, so he must have dropped him off and come straight back. Jay's not here." Penny burst into tears. Fucking universe. It could go fuck itself with 3 cactuses. 3 fucking huge thorny cactuses, full of venomous tarantulas and… "Oh, don't cry, love. Give me a sec. I'll find you a bed where you can sleep, and Baz will run you back in the morning." Penny only cried harder. "I'm supposed to spend tonight with Jay. Not alone in some charity bed." "Shush, love. Okay, I'll grab the keys and drive you back to camp then. Too dangerous to take a boat out there with the tide out, and Baz is a bear if you wake him up anyway." Penny wiped her face with her dust-covered arm. "Thank you." 56. After 20 minutes driving, Penny saw the dead four-wheel drive looming out of the darkness in the newer vehicle's headlights. "Here," Penny said, glaring at the beer fridge she could now see beside the wheel, right where Beck said it would be. She wanted to kick it into pieces, but her feet hurt too much right now. In the morning, maybe. She thanked the woman, whose name she couldn't remember, and slid out of the car. Her shoes hit sand with a crunch Penny hoped she never heard again. She was sick of sand. Penny made her way to the darkened kitchen, grabbing a slice of stale bread to still her hunger. The fire pit was dark too, and the whole place looked deserted. Luke's swag wasn't on the veranda where it usually lay. Penny hoped Beck had beaten him to death and buried him in an unmarked grave. Maybe in the cemetery, near all the other dead men, where no one would think to look. She wanted to crawl into her tent and sleep for a week, but she needed to see Jay first. To tell him why she'd stood him up. So she dragged herself to his cabin and knocked on the door. When no one answered, she peeped inside to see if he was asleep. Both beds were empty, though a guitar case on the floor told her Jay hadn't vacated the place fully yet. Penny gave up. She staggered up the hill to the bathroom, intending to freshen up before she fell into bed. As she reached the steps, the sound of music reached her ears, borne by a surprisingly chilly night breeze. Penny shivered, folding her arms across her chest, as another gust of wind brought the sound of Jay's unmistakable singing voice. Unable to help herself, Penny faced into the breeze and followed the sound. The soft music seemed to give her a second wind, which she needed to climb the hill to the beehive tree, now ringed by dried roses that lay where they'd fallen when Melissa got stung. The melody lured her on, deeper into the dunes, where she knew the old pearl divers were buried. As she passed the second gravestone, she saw them, silhouetted against the sky on the crest of the ridge, where she and Calais had watched whales. Jay sang again, a song she'd never heard before. After a moment, Calais joined in, her voice weaving around his in perfect harmony. Penny stumbled and fell to her knees. Weary beyond belief, she listened to the haunting duet sung to ghosts in a graveyard, and she felt like a ghost too. A fragment of the past best forgotten to make way for the future. What was it Jay had said he wanted in that first video? Someone to inspire love songs so beautiful he could seduce the whole world, but there was only one woman in the world he wanted. Is that woman you? His invitation echoed in her mind. No. No matter how much she wanted it to be, the answer was no. She loved him as surely as the sun would rise in the morning, but the woman he wanted was Calais. The one who could sing in harmony with his heart. Defeated, Penny dragged herself down the hill and into her lonely bed. Go ahead and laugh, universe, she thought. She'd lost, but she hadn't lost as much as Calais. It was time to let the other girl win, and wish her the best. 57. Penny slept badly. Every time she closed her eyes, it felt like she was walking through sand in endless darkness, never reaching her destination. She'd jolt awake to make sure she wasn't sleepwalking, then doze off and dream about walking again. What finally brought her out of dreamland was the smell of bacon. Not the aroma of someone slowly warming it until the fat melted in the pan, then letting it sizzle until it was just crisp without drying out. No, this was bacon burning at the hand of an idiot who had the grill turned up too high. Luke. It had to be. Penny shucked off her sleeping bag, ripped open the tent zip and marched to the kitchen, her hands itching to shove Luke's face against the hot grill until he was scarred for life. But when she reached the veranda, she saw that it wasn't Luke. It wasn't Beck, either. Jay stood at the barbecue, tongs in hand, batting at the hissing, spitting bacon when it tried to jump off the grill. Turn that down, Penny said, reaching for the burner knobs. You're murdering good bacon. I'm sorry, he said, sounding subdued. Penny sighed. Don't be. I'm sure most rock stars have personal chefs who cook their bacon for them. Most people get it wrong anyway. You're supposed to. No, I'm sorry, Jay repeated. About last night. Penny closed her eyes, not wanting him to see how much she still hurt. Me too. I was looking forward to our date last night, he continued. I wanted a chance to talk to you alone. To get to know you better when you're not cooking. Mostly because I feel like such an idiot when you're schooling me on how to cook on a bloody barbecue. I'm an Aussie bloke. This sort of thing should be in my blood, but all I can do is burn stuff. Penny cracked a smile. That's what most Aussie blokes do, alright. I'm sorry. I didn't know the whole story until Baz dropped by this morning. He was supposed to pick us all up, but I figured I'd let you sleep a little longer, and so I stayed too. I want to try and make up for what happened last night. I wanted to make you breakfast, a sort of a date, but... He swore as some of the bacon started smoking. Penny grabbed another set of tongs from the kitchen and did her best to save his bacon. So there's just the two of us, but bacon for, well, a small army. Any eggs? Jay shook his head. I waited at the restaurant last night. When we couldn't raise the camp on the radio, I made Baz bring me out here. Luke told me about the car breaking down and the radio going dead, and how you'd gone for a walk. He said you'd be back soon. He's a dickhead and a liar, Penny snarled. He said it was 15 minutes walk to the Pearl Farm. It took me hours. That's what Baz said. He took Beck back to the farm because she wanted to call her office, and Luke went with her. That left you, me and Calais, and when I told her I wanted to spend the last morning alone with you, she said she understood and headed over to the resort alone. "I'm sorry." "It's all right." It wasn't, but Penny felt she should say it. He sounded so sad, and none of it was his fault. It was that bastard Luke conniving with the universe. "When I made it back last night, I heard you too. You sound so good together." That at least was true. Jay grinned. "You think so?" Penny nodded, not trusting her voice as her eyes filled with tears. She wanted him oh so much, but Calais. Warm arms enfolded her, hugging her to his chest. Fingers stroked her hair, soothing as she cried for everything that could have been if the world weren't so fucked up. "Penelope, look at me." Reluctantly, she lifted her head, not wanting to look into those warm brown eyes with her own red-rimmed ones. "I'm so sorry." The way he looked at her, like he was begging to kiss her. Without thinking, she stretched up to grant his desire. And hers. God, yes. And hers. At only a breath away, she regained her senses. Calais. Those lips were Calais to kiss, not hers. With her heart in her throat, Penny forced herself to pull away. "I have to pack." She hurried back to her tent and started to throw her things back into her bag. If this had all happened last night, it would be fine, but he'd chosen Calais and she respected that. She should be fucking happy for her that Calais got an incredible man like Jay. She repeated it so many times to herself over the course of the day that it had become a mantra by the time she stood in the resort's pub with Calais and the camera crew, waiting for Jay to officially announce his decision. A mantra to keep herself from crying. Because no one deserved to see her cry. Especially not the happy couple. 58. Jason stopped on the veranda outside the jungle, forcing himself to breathe deeply. He almost laughed at himself, getting jittery about walking into a pub. That had to be a first for him. One more breath. In through his nostrils, before whistling out through his teeth, bared in a cocky grin he definitely didn't feel right now. Jason patted his pocket to make sure the box was still there, ready for the lucky girl he intended to propose to in a few minutes. Rockstars don't get nervous, he told himself. We just get on with the fucking show and knock 'em all dead. He strode through the palm trees past the cameras to Paige's side. Paige burbled some sort of introduction, but Jason didn't hear it. His attention was transfixed on the two girls standing opposite him. Both Calais and Penelope looked like they were going to a ball. Formal dresses, hairstyled in rigid curls and swirls, and as much makeup as Paige. Brides, that's what they looked like, he realized as his heart sank. Or bridesmaids. He'd promised them a show, and Paige had certainly met him halfway. Whoever he chose would be ready for the photo shoot he was certain Paige had planned for afterwards. After he'd proposed to one of them, and hopefully she'd accepted. Fuck. Why was this so hard? Fung, that's why. And Audra. He'd proposed to both of them, and both had ripped out his heart and stomped on it. But that wasn't going to happen tonight. He wouldn't let it. Paige's voice cut through his reverie. Jay? Yeah. Paige hitched her smile up a notch so she beamed at him. Which of these lovely ladies do you choose? Jason shook his head slowly, wanting to spin this out properly. He'd promised drama and suspense and all that shit. This was his show. First, I got a couple of gifts for the girls. To remember me by, as if they'd ever forget. He winked at the camera. Paige forced out a laugh, but the panic in her eyes told Jason she didn't like losing control one little bit. Tough. Jason nodded to Marcel, the barman, who pulled a bourbon tube from behind the bar and threw it. His aim was slightly off, but Jason easily moved to intercept the parcel's flight, plucking it out of midair as he had so many times on stage. No screams or cheering accompanied this performance. He kind of missed it. His grin didn't fade as he crossed the floor to stand before Penelope and bowed, holding the gift in his outstretched hands. A present for you. Oh. Penelope's hands shook as she took the gift. She tore through the paper, then held her prize aloft. A microphone. Oh my god, it looks like the same one from our karaoke night, Jason finished for her. Sure is. And I signed it for you too. He backed away from her to accept the second gift from Marcel. This one was too big to throw, dwarfing the bow someone had tied to the carry handle. There was no disguising this gift. Jason's eyes met Calais as he strode past Penelope to present the other girl with her parting gift. Calais swallowed, her eyes glittering with what looked like tears. Oh fuck, crying women, the last thing he needed. Jason thrust the box at her, hoping it would distract her enough to stop her from crying. Calais grasped the handle with both hands, and for a moment Jason thought it was too heavy for her, as she lowered it to the floor. Then she dropped to her knees on the tiles, heedless of her dress, as she opened the case to see what was inside. She gasped, her hands hovering over the guitar. I signed that too, he said, pointing. Calais barely glanced at the autograph. She looked like she was itching to pull the Gibson into her arms and play, just like she had that night in the dunes, but she appeared to change her mind and closed the case again without touching the guitar at all. She rose to her feet, hugging the case to her chest. Thank you. If you ever want another jam session with me, bring that and you're on, he said, his eyes searching hers. Would she want it, or would the guitar be on an online auction site by morning? Thank you, Calais repeated. I will. When I'm ready. Not yet, in other words. Jason's shoulders slumped, though not as much as Calais. He knew how much healing time could do. But sometimes it took a shitload of time. Paige clapped her hands, trying to draw attention back to her. How sweet. You bought them both presents. But you can't have both ladies, Jay, though we know your reputation. There can only be one winner here tonight. So tell me, Jay. Has the rockstar decided which girl he wants to be his wife? Everyone who'd been at the dinner had said the same thing when Paige interviewed them. They wanted him to pick Calais. Quiet, unassuming, mourning Calais. The press would rip her apart and the trolls would fight over what remained. He'd have to protect her, or things would be worse than they'd ever been with Paige. Then there was Penelope, who the staff hadn't mentioned at all. Who'd walked miles to the Pearl Farm just to go on a date with him. A fighter to the core, certainly. Down to earth, but she dressed up nice. She made pancakes that could have come from heaven. If a reporter said something she didn't like, she'd probably punch him. Or her. No. Yes. No. Jason eased the box out of his pocket, opening it and holding it up to the light so the cameras could get a good look at the huge pink-purple diamond. He thought it was hideous, but it had been donated by the local diamond mine, and he hadn't been able to refuse it. Collective gasps from all three women and some of the camera crew told him they didn't mind men bearing huge pink-purple things that formed big bulges in their pants pockets. Jason took one final deep breath. Time to decide. 59. Penny couldn't cool the heat in her cheeks. She didn't normally blush, so why was she doing it now? It was Jay. The raw sexuality of the man, and remembering the way he'd held her through their duet in this very bar. Never mind that she'd sung like one of the screeching lorikeets in the trees outside, or that she'd forgotten half the words. It had been like there was no one else in the world but the two of them that night. How could any man compare to him? Her fingers tightened around the microphone. She'd keep it forever, as a souvenir of their time together. No matter how shitty life got, she'd remember that for a short time, it had been wonderful once. And it would be again. He gave Calais a guitar. Penny suppressed a snort. At least her gift would fit in her suitcase. Where would she put a guitar? Calais could barely lift the case. And it's not like Jay even played the guitar. He was the band's lead singer. Everyone knew that. A microphone was way more personal than something huge like a guitar. It probably wasn't even a good one, just something cheap one of the production assistants had picked up for him in town. It's not like there was a music shop in town. Paige waved her hands to get Penny's attention, gesturing for the girls to stand up straight again. Lined up for a firing squad, as Jay picked one and the cameras zoomed in on the other. I won't cry, Penny swore. She might have given the cameras a blush, but she wouldn't give them a single tear to gloat over. She'd gotten what she wanted, the chance to be on TV and save her reputation. She'd signed the contract for the cooking show. Kylie could have the delicious rock star, Penny thought, as her eyes bade farewell to the well-muscled calves, vanishing into low-slung shorts that exposed the delectable muscular V pointing to the ever-present bulge in the front of his pants. Sure, he wore a shirt, but he hadn't buttoned it, so the cameras could zoom in on that toned tan six-pack that gleamed like it had been oiled. Maybe it had. After all, the makeup crew had slathered their stuff on her and Kylie. They'd probably attacked Jay with foundation, lip gloss and anything else they could think of, just for a chance to get their hands on him. Those girls got paid to oil him up, she realized, wishing she'd chosen a different career path. Maybe she could. Paige clapped her hands. So tell me, Jay. Has the rock star decided which girl he wants to be his wife? Wife? No, that never happened on these shows. Not someone he'd only known for a few short weeks. Not even rock stars fell in love that fast. She was just saying lines, something to get people at home excited when they watched the show. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't. Jay pulled something out of his pocket, showing that not all that bulging had been Jay. Oh God, she wasn't blushing again, was she? Just the thought of Jay naked. The diamond caught the light and all thought ceased. Rock. Ring. Huge. Fuck. Something bumped into Penny's side and grasped her hand. Kylie. The girl looked terrified, Penny thought. Like she wasn't ready to wear a rock that big. But who was really? This time Penny didn't hesitate. She squeezed Kylie's hand with all the support she could muster and managed a reassuring smile. While Penny would give almost anything for Jay to choose her, Kylie deserved happiness with him more. God knew she'd had precious little lately, and Penny had more than her fair share. A show. A spot on a cooking show. As long as she didn't give the cameras or the bitchy host the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Jay dropped to his knees, holding the ring up like the offering it was. Penny squeezed her eyes shut, breathing steadily in the desperate hope to stem the tears. Tears of happiness for the friend beside her, she told herself, though the TV crew wouldn't see it that way. Kylie's clammy fingers tightened around hers. Penny heard Jay clear his throat. Will you marry me? 60. Zahn had spent the whole day vacillating between wanting to go to the pub to watch Jay propose to his bride, and wanting to stay the hell away from the media circus she knew it would be. So staged, artificial and unrealistic. Could he actually love one of the girls he'd just met? She snorted. If it was her, she'd take one look at the hideous pink rock, then at the man she barely knew, and tell him how ridiculous a marriage proposal was under the circumstances. If a man wanted her love, he had to earn it. Not 4 weeks of romance, in between seducing multiple other girls, before declaring his undying love for a stranger. Surely even Jay Felix wasn't that stupid. Zahn laughed. She'd seen Jay do some damn stupid things in the year she'd known him. Swimming naked in the lagoon every morning, marrying a mail-order bride bigamist, driving while drunk and losing his license, buying a girl's virginity at auction, jumping out of a helicopter, playing golf on the roof, and now this. No, proposing marriage to a stranger wasn't out of the ordinary for Jay Felix. He had crazy for breakfast every morning. Right before his nude morning swim. And his way with women, no matter who they were, he made them feel like they mattered. Fung, Flavia, even Gaia, he'd made them feel like the only woman in the world, the only one who mattered to him. He made them fall head over heels in love with him, on top of that perfect body of his. If he wasn't the bane of her existence, would she have fallen for his charms too? Zahn mused. No. Definitely not. She'd continue to enjoy watching his morning performance in the water, of course, but that didn't mean she liked him. Couldn't stand him, in fact. But the woman who did hold his heart would be a lucky one indeed, if only because he'd do everything to make her believe his world revolved around her. How could any woman resist that sort of adoration? Maybe she'd be wrong. Maybe one of them would have the sense to tell him how ridiculous the whole setup was, or tell him an outright no. Anything was better than a nauseating yes, followed by kisses and hyperventilation. Which girl had Jay decided on anyway? Curiosity pulled Zan out of her office and halfway across the foyer before she heard the receptionist calling her name. Zan halted. "What, Philly?" "Phone call for you, Ms. Lane. A Mr. Rome from Broome Backpackers. He says it's urgent." What could the backpackers have to ask her now? She hadn't worked there for a year. It's not like any of the guests there could afford to stay at Romance Island Resort. Or take one of the day trips. "What does he want?" Philly shrugged. "He won't say. Just that it's urgent and he has to speak to you." Zan sighed. "Put him through to my office phone. I'll take the call in there." She marched back into her office, flicking the lights on. She didn't much care who Jay chose anyway. At least it wouldn't be the one who'd embezzled her company's money to pay for plastic surgery. Those unnatural boobs that didn't bounce one bit. Zan lifted the receiver to her ear. "This is Zan Lane, the hotel manager at Romance Island Resort. How can I help you?" The man on the other end burst into hysterical laughter. "Oh, thank God. I thought I'd lost you. Baby, it's me. I've come halfway round the world to tell you I was wrong. You're the only one that I want. You and no one else." "Who is this?" Zan demanded, her heart sinking as suspicion built in the back of her mind. "It's Jerome, baby, your fiancé. I'm in Broome at the Backpackers where you used to work. They gave me the number of your new place when I explained who I was. I'm here to marry you and take you back home where you belong, baby." The phone slipped from Zan's nerveless hand and smashed on the floor. 61. "Will you marry me?" Jay repeated, a note of urgency in his voice. Penny opened her eyes to look at Calais, only to find the girl's shining eyes firmly fixed on her. "What on earth?" Penny dropped her gaze to the rock star kneeling before her, holding up that blindingly beautiful diamond, but it was his eyes that mesmerized her. Warm caramel brown that she could drown in as he stared up at her. Her knees grew weak and tears sprang to her eyes. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't. She. "Will you, Penelope?" Jay's hot caramel sauce voice implored, melting her heart into mush. "Oh my God, yes." This has been The Rockstar Wants a Wife. Book 5 in the Romance Island Resort series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Chris from Google.